Lisa Maria Kaiser was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large, but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here, in the small parish of Pifo, on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Kaiser, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair, because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lisa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who, upon learning of the tragedy, immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lisa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation, as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lisa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lisa opened up about her difficult childhood, where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lisa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lisa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket, with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jaime Yanchaguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lisa. Jaime had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchaguano, Jaime's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lisa called several times inquiring about him. Lisa claimed to have received a text message from Jaime in which he wrote how some illegal substance traffickers were holding him by force and demanding a ransom of $8,000. In doing so, she strongly cautioned Jaime's family against contacting the police. It became a key point in a complex investigation that required detectives to not only solve the tragedy, but to find out if there were any other hidden victims in the story. During her interrogation, Lisa said that in 2020, while working in a cookie factory, she met Jaime Ianchaguano. According to her, he became just a friend. Lisa sought to return to her husband, who was allegedly going to blackmail Jaime to get money from him. David made it clear to his wife that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David handed Lisa a white powder and told her to slip it into Jamie's food. When the task was completed, Jaime fell asleep and never woke up again. Realizing what had happened, Lisa tried in desperation to get her husband back, but all was unsuccessful, so she swallowed the same poison and gave it to her children. However, it did not have the expected effect on her, and Lisa turned to her neighbors for help, trying to save herself from the same horror that had befallen her children. After her testimony, investigators launched an investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement in the events was ever found. No one close to the couple could have predicted that Lisa Maria and David Acosta's fate would lead them through such a difficult ordeal. When they met, Lisa was only 16 years old and still in high school. She was a dreamy and romantic girl, and David was a strong and determined young man. Soon their friendship developed into strong feelings, and this led to Lisa's unexpected pregnancy. Although the young people's families did not approve of their relationship, David's parents always supported their son and welcomed Lisa into their family. In difficult moments, David's family became a true support for the young couple. Inviting Lisa to live with them, they made every effort to make sure she finished high school. When Lisa turned 18, the lovers got married. 2 years later, the young family was waiting for the appearance of a second child, a little daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own housing. They gave Lisa and David a separate apartment, which became for them a corner of family happiness. But over time, the couple's relationship began to deteriorate. It was obvious that both spouses sinned of cheating, which led to mistrust and disappointment. Boundless love, which seemed unshakable, began to weaken. To make matters worse, Lisa complained of psychological abuse from David, which led her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, and David was forced to leave the family home. It was at this point that Lisa began to use her position and blackmail David, demanding money for the opportunity to see their joint children. The beginning of September 2020 brought an unexpected challenge into Lisa's life that drastically changed her daily routine. The young mother discovered that her oldest son was suffering from seizures, and in desperation, she went to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing the baby's condition, the doctors decided to conduct a series of tests, revealing a focal form of epilepsy, a severe disease that affects a specific part of the brain. The doctors urged Lisa to undergo additional tests, including MRI scans, and to consult with specialists as soon as possible. However, the mother, as if ignoring the seriousness of the situation, decided not to follow these recommendations. A month later, the situation was repeated. Lisa was back in the emergency room with her son suffering from the same symptoms. After reviewing the boy's medical history, the doctors discovered that the mother had somehow failed to fulfill the prescriptions given to her earlier. No tests had been taken, consultations with specialists had not taken place, and it seems that the son had not received the necessary treatment. The doctors, concerned for the child's welfare, once again reminded Lisa of the importance of following medical advice. They warned her that ignoring the doctor's advice could lead to legal consequences, as she could be putting her son's health and well-being at risk. However, this time too, Lisa disregarded the doctor's warning. A couple weeks after discovering her son's illness, she decided to call David. The serious tone in her voice worried David. She informed him that a social worker would be coming to see her shortly to discuss their son's diagnosis and retirement. On the day of the appointment, David showed up, but the social worker was long gone. To brighten the waiting time, Lisa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up. so David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb. Every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system, but given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lissa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lissa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lissa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache, her stomach began to upset, and eventually she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lissa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lissa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lissa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lissa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed, but now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lissa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lissa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lissa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lissa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke.
Lissa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Erazo, a friend of Lissa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious, and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lissa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later Lissa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lissa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jaime, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lissa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lissa Maria Kaiser for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jaime Yanchaguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jaime Yanchaguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen.
The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lissa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lissa Maria Kaiser was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lissa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jaime Yanchaguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lissa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lissa, she did not want to take Jaime's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered ribcage and wire around the neck. Lissa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lissa bought building materials during the days of Jaime's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lissa called Jaime's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters, and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lissa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jaime's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Erazo, Lissa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lissa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lissa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lissa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lissa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there was evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lissa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Erazo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lissa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Doña Venado. Lissa Maria Kaisi is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Lissa could be released when she turned 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Doña Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lissa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Doña Venado, but also the fate of 2 innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly. Fatal love from the past. Kindness has the power not only to save the world, but also to destroy the one who brings it to others. The natural desire to help everyone, to protect, to guard, to save, and to prevent harm often leads to tragedy. It is important to recognize which people should not be helped, and even more so, to avoid covering for them in the hope that they will realize their mistake and change. The story of Cecilia Haddad is a vivid example of how believing in the best and the desire to protect someone once dear can first poison and then take a life. She feared harming her former lover in any way, but he had no fear in dealing with her and fleeing to the other side of the world, hoping justice wouldn't reach him there. An unidentified body in the river. On an early spring morning, Sunday, April 29, 2018, a man fishing on Lane Cove River, a northern tributary of the Parramatta River in Sydney, Australia, came upon a horrific scene. Floating downstream, face down, was something resembling a human body. The elderly fisherman couldn't believe his eyes at first and even thought it was a mistake, but within minutes, all doubts vanished. It was the body of a young woman with long dark hair. The man immediately reported the incident to the police, and soon, a few dozen feet downstream, the lifeless body of a young woman showing signs of violent death was pulled from the river. She had no identification or mobile phone on her, so investigators were tasked with identifying the deceased and determining the circumstances of the tragedy.
The version that the incident was an accident was dismissed during the initial examination of the remains. The body was still fresh, having spent less than a day in the water. Clear strangulation marks were visible on her neck, and there were defensive wounds on her hands, indicating that the victim had fought desperately when she was attacked. The victim was dressed in a t-shirt and wide pants with many large pockets, which were stuffed with stones. It was obvious that the criminal had hoped the body, weighed down by the extra load, would sink and not be discovered anytime soon. However, some of the stones likely fell out since the pockets had no fasteners, allowing the body to simply float downstream. A toxicology report revealed no traces of alcohol, prohibited substances, or strong drugs in the victim's system. There were also no signs of intimate violence on the body. As initially suspected, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled with bare hands. The victim appeared to be around 35 to 40 years old, so the police immediately checked reports of missing women within this age range. By the afternoon, they had identified the deceased after relatives reported the disappearance of 38-year-old Cecilia Haddad, who had suddenly stopped responding on April 28th and missed an important work meeting. A glance at Cecilia's photo convinced detectives that it was her body that had been pulled from the river, and relatives arriving for identification confirmed the fact. But who could have so cruelly dealt with a young woman and successful entrepreneur known for her active charity work? However, the name of the main suspect was almost immediately identified, but by that time, he was already on another continent. Who was Cecilia Haddad? Cecilia Bruna Haddad was born in the fall of 1979 in the bustling metropolis of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She grew up in a close-knit, middle-class family where her parents did everything they could to provide their many children with a good education and all the necessities. From a young age, Cecilia was very smart, responsible, and goal-oriented. She became one of the best students in her school and dreamed of continuing her education at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Additionally, Cecilia had a kind heart. She couldn't ignore someone else's misfortune and always tried to help within her abilities. Those around her described her as a compassionate, caring, and generous young woman, always ready to lend a hand. After finishing school, Haddad became a student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, one of Brazil's leading private universities. There, she earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering. After receiving her diploma, Cecilia successfully passed an interview at a major mining company, where she was eagerly hired. Almost immediately, her career took off, and within a year, she became a leading specialist. In 2007, at the age of 27, the Brazilian woman decided to dramatically change her life and moved to Australia after receiving an enticing job offer. Cecilia fully understood the challenges she would face being in a foreign country, far from her loved ones and friends, but she decided to take the risk. Cecilia was fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, her native languages, but had to learn English almost from scratch, a task she handled successfully and quickly. Haddad took a managerial position at one of Australia's largest mining companies and quickly fit in with the team. The sweet, sociable, and friendly woman made many friends and began actively engaging in charity work and volunteering, helping people and homeless animals. Alongside this, she developed a new hobby, hiking and skiing in the mountains. In 2016, Cecilia founded her own consulting company, which supported and guided people looking to start their own businesses. Her clients included both native Australians and immigrants who had come to the country in search of a better life, just as she had once done. Personal life. Working at the aforementioned major Australian industrial company, Cecilia earned a good salary and could afford whatever she wanted. When she started her own business, she was able to bring her younger brother and sister from Brazil, helping them find jobs and supporting them financially at first. Overall, things were going well for Cecilia. She traveled, earned a second higher education, and lived life to the fullest. However, in terms of her personal life, Haddad was far less fortunate. Back in her student days, in her hometown of Rio de Janeiro, she entered into a romantic relationship with Mario Marcelo Santoro, a man 7 years her senior and her complete opposite. The young man was lazy, unambitious, and didn't aspire to much. But Cecilia loved him, always trying to help and motivate him toward success. In the end, when Cecilia received a job offer from Australia, Mario refused to go with her, fearing the challenges they would face in a new country. However, the young woman wasn't about to give up on her dream, one she had worked so hard for, and after prolonged but fruitless persuasion, she left alone. In the mid-2000s, while working in Sydney, Cecilia began an office romance with one of her colleagues. This relationship led to marriage, but the union was short-lived, lasting less than 3 years. The couple didn't have children, and they parted ways amicably, without hard feelings or resentment. They even maintained a friendly relationship afterward. A blast from the past. In 2016, shortly after her divorce, Cecilia decided to fly home to visit her parents and old friends. By that time, she had already left her job and was successfully growing her own business. She looked fantastic, enthusiastically talked about her life in Australia, and eagerly made plans for the future. On the third day of her stay, Haddad unexpectedly ran into Mario, whom she hadn't seen in 9 years since she emigrated to Australia. The man was shocked by the success his former girlfriend had achieved, while he himself was barely making ends meet. This chance encounter turned out to be fateful for Cecilia, who suddenly realized that she still had tender feelings for her ex-boyfriend. For the next few days, the two spent time walking around their favorite places where they had once been happy. After Cecilia returned to Sydney, they continued to talk and text every day. Within a month, Cecilia bought Mario a plane ticket and essentially brought him to live with her, deciding he was the man she would be happy with for the rest of her life. The couple settled in Cecilia's spacious apartment in an elite residential complex, and for a time, she fully supported her beloved. Later, using her connections, she helped him secure a good position with a high salary and actively encouraged his career growth. Haddad was once again in love, just like in her youth, and failed to notice that her partner was simply taking advantage of the situation. Toxic relationship. Shortly after the couple moved in together, their relationship began to deteriorate. The man became jealous, domineering, and tried to control every aspect of Cecilia's life. However, independent and strong-willed, Cecilia refused to be manipulated. On top of that, Mario started meddling in her business, wanting a share since he didn't like working for someone else. The couple frequently argued, but Haddad always tried to resolve conflicts, seeking compromises and making every effort to save the relationship. Yet, her partner was simply draining her emotionally, monitoring her actions, taking her phone and work laptop without permission, and trying to limit her social circle. Cecilia endured this situation for almost a year, but finally decided to have an honest conversation and informed Mario of her intention to break up. This news infuriated him. He started yelling and insulting Cecilia, and when she tried to calm him down, he struck her across the face. He had been physically aggressive before, pushing her or grabbing her arms hard enough to leave bruises, but this was the first time he had hit her. This was the last straw, and Haddad simply showed him the door. At first, Santoro tried to beg for her forgiveness. He sent her touching messages, apologized, and sent flowers and gifts, but Cecilia remained firm. Realizing he couldn't fix things, the man changed tactics, resorting to threats and intimidation. From that point on, he began stalking his ex-girlfriend, turning her life into a nightmare. Obsessed stalker. After the breakup, Mario rented an apartment in a complex just 10 minutes away from Cecilia's home. He called her daily, sent dozens of messages, and constantly tried to meet her, waiting at her front door. Cecilia still tried to reason with him, hoping to resolve the conflict peacefully, and believed that her ex would calm down. In January 2018, late in the evening, Santoro showed up at Haddad's apartment again. At first, she didn't want to let him in, but he was persistent and forced his way inside. He attacked the petite woman, but she miraculously managed to escape and barricade herself in another room. While the stalker tried to break down the door, she pleaded with him to stop, think, and leave. Eventually, Cecilia threatened to call the police, and only then did Mario calm down and leave her home. Cecilia didn't report the incident to law enforcement, nor did she mention that Mario had been stalking her for months and threatening her. She knew that his visa had expired, and that if he came to the authorities' attention, he would be deported back to Brazil immediately. Cecilia pitied the man she once loved, knowing that back home he would return to his worthless life. Despite this, Haddad understood that staying in her apartment was no longer safe, so she temporarily moved in with her sister Carol and then spent about a month living with a close friend named Rita. Both women urged Cecilia to file a police report, sensing that this situation could end in tragedy, but she was still afraid of harming her tormentor. She hoped that he would realize the error of his ways, calm down, and leave her alone. Most importantly, she didn't believe that her ex-boyfriend was capable of causing her any serious physical harm. When Cecilia returned to her apartment in early April 2018, she realized that Mario had been there several times in her absence. She was horrified to discover that he had a spare set of keys, which he had initially returned after the breakup, but took back when he forced his way in during the night. Neighbors also confirmed that they had seen Santoro near the complex multiple times, and even going up to the floor where Haddad's apartment was located. When they reasonably suggested she go to the police, Cecilia again refused, assuring them she would handle the situation herself. She planned to change the locks, but decided to live incognito for the time being, not drawing attention to herself, to see if her stalker would leave her alone. For over 2 weeks, Cecilia acted as though she wasn't home. She didn't turn on the lights, tried to stay quiet, and only came and went when she was sure Mario wasn't around. At the slightest suspicion, she would spend the night at her sister's or a friend's. The stress almost caused her to have a breakdown, but then, suddenly, everything changed in an instant. Strange goodbye. On April 25th, 2018, Mario unexpectedly called Cecilia and, in a calm voice, said that he had realized everything and would no longer bother her. He also apologized and informed her that he had bought tickets for a flight to Rio de Janeiro. He planned to leave early in the morning on April 28th and asked if she would meet him one last time to say goodbye. Haddad agreed, but said she would meet him directly at the airport, where they could see each other and talk. After this call, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her stalker and tormentor had decided to leave on his own, and she believed he would no longer disturb her. Overjoyed, she called her sister and told her everything. But Carol was not as thrilled and suspected something was off. She begged Cecilia not to meet with Mario, but Cecilia dismissed her concerns, assuring her that everything would be fine and that nothing could happen to her at the airport. Cecilia was excited at the thought that her nightmare was finally ending and that she could start a new life. Sadly, that miracle did not happen. Mysterious disappearance. On Saturday, April 28th, Cecilia was supposed to arrive at Sydney International Airport by 7 a.m. to see her ex-boyfriend off and say a final goodbye. Afterward, she had an important work meeting scheduled and another in the afternoon. The night before, Cecilia had one last call with her sister, telling her about her plans. Carol again tried to dissuade her from meeting her ex, but Cecilia was adamant. She insisted that she needed to see for herself
that Mario boarded the plane and would no longer bother her. The two sisters talked for about an hour,
and Cecilia promised to call as soon as he left. However, the next day, instead of a call, a rather strange message arrived from Haddad. She said she was heading to the mountains for a couple of days because she needed to reflect on everything that had happened and clear her head. Carol tried to call her, but the phone was already turned off. Soon, it became clear that similar messages had been sent to several of Cecilia's friends and colleagues, and she had not shown up for any of her scheduled meetings, which was completely out of character for her. That evening, Cecilia's family and friends reported her missing to the police, providing the name and details of the potential suspect. At that time, they still hoped she was alive, but by the next morning, all hope was shattered when her sister was called to identify her body. Investigation and evidence search. On April 29th, the police combed the riverbank upstream, searching for clues or evidence. They found a discarded pair of men's shoes soaked through in the grass. Detectives speculated that the criminal didn't want to leave tracks and decided to dispose of the shoes. In the victim's apartment, dried footprints left by wet socks were found. But why did he return to the victim's apartment after dealing with her? Since Mario didn't own a car, he used the vehicle of the woman he had deprived of life to dispose of her body. Sand, fragments of coastal vegetation, and puddles of river water were found inside the car. Additionally, numerous fingerprints belonging to the suspect were discovered. Moreover, almost all of Santoro's movements were tracked through his cell phone signal, and he was caught on several street surveillance cameras. It was determined that Mario took a taxi to the airport. Authorities quickly located the driver, who agreed to speak with them. The driver claimed the passenger was calm, but asked for a significant detour to pass over a small bridge crossing a river away from the bustling city roads. There, he asked to stop, got out, and threw a bag into the water, as well as something resembling a set of keys. He then returned to the car and they continued the journey. The driver took the police to that very bridge. Divers were called to the scene and spent hours searching the riverbed for evidence. Fortunately, the current in that spot was weak, so they soon found the mysterious bag, followed by the set of keys. Inside the bag were the victim's cell phone, work laptop, some documents, a wallet, and personal items. It was clear the suspect was trying to create the illusion that the woman had left town, so people would believe she had indeed gone to the mountains. He also disposed of all duplicate keys to make it harder to access the apartment. By the time Cecilia's body was pulled from the river, the perpetrator had already landed in Rio de Janeiro, convinced that he would never be caught and would escape punishment. Retrieving a criminal on another continent is indeed a challenge, but with no doubt left about his involvement in the crime, Interpol was called in. The manhunt expanded internationally, drawing significant media attention. Search and arrest of the suspect. Only after Australian police gathered and presented irrefutable evidence linking the Brazilian citizen to the brutal crime was Mario officially declared wanted in his home country. He was finally apprehended on July 7, 2018, at a friend's apartment, where he had been staying the entire time. Santoro didn't resist arrest, but immediately requested a lawyer. During the initial interrogations, he denied his guilt, but soon, under the weight of overwhelming evidence, he began confessing. However, even as he admitted to the crime, he desperately tried to blame the victim. Mario claimed that it wasn't him, but his former girlfriend, who had been stalking him after their breakup and wouldn't let him live in peace. He said he decided to leave the country just to escape her, but Cecilia allegedly stole his passport to prevent him from leaving. That morning, according to him, he went to her apartment to retrieve his document without which he couldn't board the plane, but she refused to return it. A struggle ensued, and he accidentally ended her life. The accused claimed he tried to resuscitate Haddad, performing CPR and chest compressions. However, when he realized she was gone, he panicked and attempted to cover his tracks by disposing of her body and the evidence. His best idea, he said, was to dump everything in the river. Reconstructing the timeline of events. Reconstructing the timeline of that tragic day was a painstaking process since Mario constantly changed his testimony and tried to confuse the investigation to minimize his guilt. He played on sympathy, even attempting to cry, but no one believed his version of events. The victim's family, friends, and colleagues all testified against Santoro as they had witnessed how he had made Cecilia's life a nightmare. According to the investigation, by the time Mario purchased his plane tickets, he had already decided to take the life of his former girlfriend and was meticulously planning the details. On Saturday, April 28th, around 5:30 a.m., he arrived at Cecilia's building and rang the intercom. Cecilia wasn't expecting him and thought they would meet at the airport. Feeling uneasy, she didn't want to let him in. A few minutes later, the man opened the door using a spare key he had and climbed the stairs to Cecilia's apartment. It's likely she let him in because otherwise the neighbors would have heard some noise, but they reported hearing nothing unusual. Mario immediately attacked Cecilia, strangling her and not giving her a chance to scream or call for help. She fought back desperately, as evidenced by the bruises and hematomas on her arms, but she was overpowered. After ending her life, he wrapped the body in a blanket, took the keys to her car, and quietly made his way to the parking lot while all the residents were still asleep. He drove to a secluded spot by the river, filled her pants pockets with rocks, and submerged her body in the water, hoping it wouldn't be discovered anytime soon. During this process, the suspect soaked his shoes and decided to discard them to avoid leaving any traces, as he planned to return to her apartment. Around 7 a.m., Mario returned to Cecilia's building using her car. He went back up to her apartment and quickly gathered some of her belongings, including documents and her laptop, to simulate her departure. He also sent text messages from her phone to family members and several friends, pretending she had suddenly gone on a trip to the mountains. He later put the phone in the same bag, which he threw from the bridge into the river. After completing this, Mario walked back to his own apartment where his suitcase was already packed. He showered, changed his clothes, and soaked the ones he had been wearing in bleach to destroy any potential evidence, then called a taxi to the airport. On the way, he asked the driver to make a detour to dispose of Cecilia's belongings, and within an hour, he calmly boarded a plane, convinced he would never be held accountable for his actions. The trial and verdict. Since the accused was a Brazilian citizen, he could not be extradited to another continent to stand trial for the crime he committed. However, the countries managed to reach an agreement and resolve legal differences to ensure the trial would be as fair as possible, although the suspect would serve his sentence in his home country. The bureaucratic hurdles and investigation process took some time, and the trial didn't begin until June 2023. Delegates from Australia, who had been directly involved in the investigation, traveled to Rio de Janeiro to participate in the trial. Throughout the proceedings, the defendant tried to evoke pity from the judges, crying and claiming to feel remorse, insisting he didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. On July 1st, 2023, Mario Santoro was found guilty of premeditated crime, as well as tampering with evidence and attempting to mislead the investigation. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The convicted man and his lawyers repeatedly tried to appeal the sentence, but the court upheld its decision. A crime of honor committed by close relatives. A crime of honor is a severe criminal act, typically, but not necessarily, committed against a female family member as punishment for bringing disgrace and dishonor upon the family. The offenses punishable by death at the hands of relatives can vary across different countries and cultures, but often include marital infidelity and apostasy. Each year, according to official statistics, around 5,000 such crimes occur worldwide. However, various women's rights organizations claim this number is at least 4 times underreported. What is most alarming is that often, the perpetrators face no punishment, and their actions are deemed righteous. Police in countries where such crimes are prevalent simply turn a blind eye to these acts, and although it is claimed that in recent years the penalties for such actions have been intensified, there are no official data to substantiate this. Sami Shahid's case in 2016 shocked the world. She was forcibly married off to a cousin she openly despised and sent to her ancestral homeland. However, she soon broke off this imposed union to marry for love, against her relatives' wishes, and paid the ultimate price for it. Her story drew intense public scrutiny as she was a British citizen of Pakistani descent. Yet she met her tragic end in Pakistan, where the case was quickly suppressed, attempting to frame it as an unfortunate accident. The Shahid family story. Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid and Matiaz Shahid emigrated to the UK in the mid-1980s from a small Pakistani village named Pandori, located in the Jhelum district of Punjab province. They moved to a foreign land in search of a better life to escape the poverty they lived in back home. In November 1987, their eldest daughter Sami was born in the English city of Bradford, located in West Yorkshire, and a few years later, her younger sister Mita was born. The head of the family established his own business renting cars, which later focused on renting luxury vehicles, including high-end limousines. As his business prospered, he helped two of his brothers and their families also move from Pakistan and settle in the UK. The relatives also opened and successfully developed their businesses. One brother had his own seafood shop chain by the early 2000s, and the other opened a flower delivery and floristry company. Overall, the Shahid family was quite well known and successful in Bradford, being quite wealthy and influential. Sisters Sami and Mita were born and raised in the UK, but their family strictly adhered to the laws and traditions of their ancestral country, so the girls grew up under the influence of a mix of European and Pakistani cultures and customs. The liberal English views and manners starkly contrasted with the strict orders of their ancestors' country. For example, the girls were not allowed to drive a car, and all their contacts and movements were strictly monitored by their father. The elder daughter, Sami, was the apple of Chaudhry Mohammed's eye and was considered daddy's girl. He indulged her in every way, buying her expensive outfits and jewelry, and paid for her education at one of the most prestigious universities. She meticulously cared for her appearance, used cosmetics from well-known brands, visited beauty salons, and spent extravagant amounts of money there. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a post office, essentially supported by her father who paid for all her whims and desires. Frequently, Sami, without her family knowing, would rent a car and drive herself. She loved driving, felt confident behind the wheel, and did not understand why Pakistani traditions forbade women from doing so. She was headstrong and freedom-loving, but she tried not to upset her parents, doing everything as they said. Shahid had many friends from school and university in England with whom she kept in touch. She was characterized as a bright, kind, and cheerful person. Forced marriage. Despite living a life filled with love and abundance and seemingly having everything she wanted, the woman was deprived of the opportunity to make any decisions independently. She constantly lived with an eye towards her parents' and elder family members' opinions, from whom she needed constant approval for her actions. More than anything, Sami feared upsetting her father, whom she adored. However, numerous prohibitions, fears, and strict orders meant she was never truly honest with her family. In 2012, her parents decided it was time for their eldest daughter to settle down, get married, start her own family, and have children. They insisted that she go to Pakistan and enter into a marriage in accordance with all the rules and cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Chaudhry Mohammed Shakil, whom she barely knew, as her groom. It's worth noting that marriages between relatives and arranged marriages are quite common, although not a strict requirement in Sunni Islam, but the tradition is honored to this day. Sami knew that sooner or later her parents would choose a husband for her and present it as a fait accompli, leaving her with no choice in the matter. She was prepared for this, understanding the inevitability of such a marriage, but her father's choice was truly shocking to her. Shaquille was openly distasteful to her, even causing her some repulsion. Additionally, he had recently been released from prison where he served time for ending someone's life over a land dispute. Since childhood, Sami occasionally interacted with Shaquille as if he were a brother, but she could never imagine him as her spouse. Notably, her own parents were also cousins whose marriage was arranged by relatives, but they managed to genuinely fall in love and build a happy family. Her parents believed that their daughter would experience the same fate and that she and Chaudhry would eventually fall in love. Despite her aversion to the groom, Sami could not disobey her father and understood how important this was to her family. However, her mother and younger sister Mita later claimed that no one forced her into the marriage, and given her complex and headstrong character, it would have been impossible to do so physically or morally. She married voluntarily, without any coercion. In early February 2012, the decision about the upcoming wedding was finalized at a family council. The following couple of weeks, her parents and aunt and uncle, future in-laws, took the bride shopping, where she chose everything she liked, and they paid for expensive outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and so on. Sami was denied nothing, but it all seemed as if she was being purchased. Likely that was indeed the case. The bride pretended to be caught up in the wedding preparations, but inwardly she felt like a hostage. She already understood that this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would be a real punishment. However, she could only discuss this with her friends, not her family. At home, she needed to appear happy, discuss the details of the upcoming celebration, and prepare for her departure to Pakistan. On February 20th, 2012, the young woman boarded a plane and while in the cabin, sent a message to a close friend saying she was flying thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no choice. Later, she sent several more messages in which she confessed that the mere sight of the groom made her nauseous, and she could not stand to be near him. On February 27th, a lavish wedding was held for Sami and Chaudhry in Pandori, attended by about 1,000 people. The celebration lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, her parents presented the newlyweds with their own luxurious 2-story house, located next to their family home in the same province of Pandori. However, the young woman understood that this rich and beautiful house would become a real prison for her, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. Return to the United Kingdom. Family life, predictably, did not bring Sami happiness. She still detested her now lawful husband and realized she could neither love this man nor even grow accustomed to him. But 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, the young woman returned to her native Bradford to sort out some issues and help her husband with the immigration documents for obtaining British citizenship. She was supposed to apply for a spousal visa for Shaquille, but she was in no hurry with this, enjoying the illusion of freedom and the opportunity to not see her unloved husband for some time. When Sami finally started processing the documents, she learned that their wedding ceremony, conducted according to all the canons of Sharia, was just a marriage contract between Muslims but had no legal force in the United Kingdom. To recognize such a marriage, certain measures under European laws were necessary, namely conducting a civil ceremony and obtaining an official document, a marriage certificate. Friends of Sami noticed changes in her character and behavior after returning from Pakistan. The young woman appeared sad, her eyes seemed extinguished. She was no longer the joyful and sociable person she used to be, and she clearly harbored deep resentment towards her parents. Any conversations or mentions of her husband and family life provoked irritation and anger in her. The issue was that Shackle was very jealous and tormented his wife, even from another country. He constantly called her and could demand at any time that she video chat with him. This was how the man controlled where his wife was, what she was doing, and who was with her. Moreover, this was, in a way, a demonstration of the husband's superiority and his power over the woman. In early August of the same year, during a phone conversation with a close friend, Sami confessed that her nerves were giving out. She was completely drained and no longer wanted to live because she had lost any joy, hope for happiness, and a bright future.
She said she detested Chaudhry with all her soul and never wanted to see him again. However, she could not say this to her relatives. They only went around telling everyone about the luxurious wedding they had arranged for their eldest daughter. The very man. In early September, without having resolved the issues with the spousal visa, Sami was forced to return to Pakistan to her unloved husband. She regularly wrote to friends about how miserable she was, how much she hated her marriage, and how she felt trapped with no way out. This continued for several months, but then she began to complain less frequently, and her mood changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, it became clear what had caused this change. It turned out that she had met a young man online, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who, like her, was a British citizen of Pakistani origin. He was born and raised in London but had been working and living in the United Arab Emirates for the last few years. The pair started corresponding and quickly developed romantic feelings. They secretly arranged a meeting, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Sami immediately realized that Syed was the man of her dreams, with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. He was kind, caring, attentive, and courted her beautifully. They had a lot in common, but they both understood how dangerous and risky their relationship was. Nevertheless, life only seemed meaningful to the young people when they were together. She openly told her beloved about the situation she was in and said she was ready to end her marriage to start anew with Syed. However, she could not get a divorce through a British court because, according to local law, she was not married at all. Divorce and new marriage. In the spring of 2014, Shahid decided to speak with Shakil and asked him for a divorce, but he rudely refused, stating that she would belong to him until the end of her days. Then, during another visit to the United Kingdom to her parents, she secretly contacted a local Islamic Sharia council, reporting that she had been forced into marriage, which was a valid basis for annulling the marriage. She also converted from Sunni to the Shiite branch of Islam, which her new lover belonged to. The cleric contacted the woman's husband to hear his side regarding their marriage, but he again rudely refused to discuss his personal life, stating that he would not give permission for a divorce. After that, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom dissolved the marriage, recognizing that Shahid had been coerced into it by family pressure. Sami's family members had no idea that she had divorced her husband in absentia and was preparing to remarry, now to the man she loved. In September 2014, the young woman secretly married her new chosen one. This time, the union had legal force, and the spouses received a certificate of registration of their relationship, confirming its legality. The same cleric who had granted permission to dissolve the bride's previous marriage conducted the Nikah religious ceremony. Only a few close friends of the newlyweds, who were present at their wedding, knew about this event. The couple was truly happy. Sami confessed to her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. However, this joyous and happy event was the beginning of a real nightmare: family dispute and escape from the country. When Shakil demanded that his wife return to Pakistan, she responded that she no longer belonged to him and presented a certificate of her new marriage. This infuriated the man, who immediately called his father-in-law to inform him of the situation, sparking a severe scandal. The family attempted to coerce her to return to her husband with threats, but she refused, which soon led to severe consequences. A few weeks later, Sami was brutally assaulted on the street while shopping with her sister. Notably, her sister was unharmed, but Sami nearly had her legs broken with metal bars. The police took her statement but failed to find the men responsible for the assault, and the case was quickly dismissed. At this time, Syed had to fly to Dubai for work, leaving his wife in the United Kingdom awaiting a visa to follow him. The wait became a real torment for her, filled with endless threats, disputes with relatives, and fear for her life. Moreover, her parents tried to prove that their daughter's divorce from Shakil was invalid, and even caused a scene with the cleric who had married the lovers. Sami's mother was furious, insulting her daughter,
and saying that she had disgraced their family and would suffer terrible retribution. In the spring of 2015, Sami finally received her visa and was able to fly to her husband in Dubai. It felt more like an escape, as the young woman feared her family would do everything possible to keep her and forcibly return her to Pakistan. For several months, she kept her passport with friends who also bought her a plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport. A new life. The following year was the happiest in Sami's life. She enjoyed her freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, living with the man she loved, who adored her and was ready to carry her on his hands. Additionally, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband would never have allowed her to do. In photos posted on social media, Sami was radiantly happy. She blossomed, looked more beautiful, and it was clear she had achieved what she had always dreamed of. Shahid wanted to become a mother as soon as possible, but sadly, this happiness was not meant to be for her. Nonetheless, she and her husband confidently looked to the future, making plans for their lives, unaware that her closest relatives had already condemned her. Immediately after their daughter's departure, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later wanted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Kazim of the crime. The Shahid family members started devising a plan to force the young woman to return by any means necessary, considering various options. Threats no longer worked on her, but they could play on her sympathy. A sinister trap. In June 2016, Sami's parents conveyed tragic news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Sami was devastated and even considered flying to Pakistan for the funeral, but she was aware of the risks involved. Many family members still hadn't accepted that she had left her unloved husband and remarried. Her actions were viewed as betrayal and disgrace. A week after the aunt's funeral, her mother called again, reporting that her father's health had severely deteriorated. He had diabetes, and his condition had recently become unstable. If he passed away, Sami knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't visit him. Despite her concerns and her husband's attempts to dissuade her, she decided to travel to Pandori. Fearing for her life and safety, she promised her husband to keep in constant contact with him. On July 14, 2016, Shahid arrived in Pakistan and first went to a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, shared her fears, noted her bad premonition, and asked her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The following few days passed relatively peacefully. She stayed in touch with her husband and friend, updating them on her movements. She visited her aunt's grave with her family and met with many relatives. She was scheduled to fly back to Dubai on July 21st. However, on July 20th, Sami suddenly stopped making contact. Tragic news. On July 20th, 2016, Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid called the police station to report the tragic death of his daughter. When law enforcement arrived at the house where Sami had lived with her first husband, they found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Unfortunately, it was too late to help her. There were several visible bruises on her body, which, according to her parents, she sustained from falling down the stairs, and a small amount of pinkish foam was found coming out of her mouth. According to her father, Sami likely had a heart problem, fell, and rolled down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she was not assisted promptly and she passed away. When asked about the whereabouts of the deceased's husband, Chaudhry stated that he had gone out on business. The police found no signs of foul play at the scene and did not open a criminal case, leaving the final determination to the forensic experts. An autopsy was conducted on the same day, yet the pathologist found no signs of violence, and the conclusion was that her death was due to natural causes. She was buried within a few hours of her death. Sami's sudden demise was not considered suspicious and raised no questions, except from her grieving husband. When Kazim was informed of his wife's sudden death from a heart attack, he couldn't believe it. Moreover, the press called the young woman's death a voluntary departure from life due to depression over her inability to have children. However,
This version was contested by Shahid's relatives, who claimed she lost consciousness on the stairs and broke her neck while falling. Investigation and the grim truth. Syed Muhtar flew to Pandori on the first available flight and went straight to the police station to report that his wife was deprived of her life by her relatives and former husband. He described the forced marriage and her escape, as well as threats from her family. This information fundamentally changed the case. The authorities recognized it as an honor crime, but the body had already been buried, and the official report stated that Shahid died of natural causes. However, as the deceased was a British citizen, Kazim sought to involve European law enforcement and the media in the investigation. Initially, Sami's father agreed to an interview and tried to portray Syed Muhtar as an imposter and extortionist. However, after the young man produced their marriage certificate, as well as a hard-won copy of the medical report and post-mortem photos of the deceased, an investigation was initiated. The report noted bruises on the deceased's neck and legs and traces of male seminal fluid on her body, indicating that she had intimate relations shortly before her demise. But with whom, if Shakil was supposedly not at home that day? Kazim held a press conference, presenting all the evidence he had, including text, voice, and video messages from Sami, in which she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. Suspicions arose that the police had been bribed, and the deceased's father and former husband were immediately detained. It turned out they had no intention of letting the young woman return to Dubai. They forcibly brought her to the house given as a wedding gift, where they searched all her belongings for the passport and ticket, which, as mentioned, she had left with a friend. A furious Shakil, with his father-in-law's tacit approval, physically subdued the young woman, and after she tried to escape, the men caught up with her on the stairs. While the former husband strangled Sami with her scarf, the father held her legs, leaving her no chance of survival. This account was confessed at the station by the perpetrator himself, although Chaudhry Muhammad denied any involvement in the act against his own daughter. Legal proceedings and the fate of the participants. Besides the father and former husband, the deceased's uncle, who had acquired a forged report before the autopsy, and the commissioner who conducted the initial investigation, were also detained. In court, Shakil recanted his confession, claiming it was made under duress. He spent just over 2 years behind bars but was released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, the man remarried and again attempted to relocate to the United Kingdom, which was unsuccessful. The father of the deceased was in prison from July to December 2016 and was also released on bail. He passed away in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to exacerbated health problems, never admitting guilt or involvement in his daughter's demise. The deceased's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any consequences. Soon after, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Mita and Matiaz Shahid, but the mother and sister of the deceased promptly returned to Bradford. Mita later gave a substantial interview in which she attempted to discredit Sami and her second husband, blaming them for the downfall of the once happy Shahid family. Another mysterious story took us to Namyangju City in South Korea. On June 6, 2006, 29-year-old student Lee Yoon-hee disappeared without a trace. It would seem that nothing is unusual. People often disappear. However, this case is still stirring the minds of the public. Many people to this day continue to argue and put forward their own versions of what happened. Disappearance. For the first time about the fact that the girl disappeared spoke on June 7th. The alarm was raised by her friends and classmates. Lee did not come to the university for the last classes, which was very unlike her. She was a responsible and efficient student and had never missed a class before. After studying, Lee's friend Min wanted to check on her and went to her house. However, after ringing the doorbell, no one opened the door. Then she didn't bother and left. Later in an interview, the girl admitted that she decided that Yoon-hee wanted to be alone and had a day off. It so happened that her acquaintance had been haunted by a series of troubles lately. Therefore, it was possible that she needed time to get away. However, on June 8th, she didn't show up again. This time, Min went with Kim, Lee's friend, and 2 other guys to the missing person's house. There was no other way to contact her. It so happened that a week before the described events, the main character's purse was stolen, and together with her purse, Idaho card, and cell phone. When young people knocked on the door, the dog reacted to the noise from inside. The dog barked loudly, but there was no response from the owner. Since Yoon Hee's door had a digital lock, only someone who knew the code could open it. No one present had such information, so Min called the older sister of the wanted woman. But unfortunately, she hadn't heard from her sister and didn't know the code to the door. All this only added to the excitement. Eventually, it was decided to contact the police. Law enforcement officers contacted the owner of the apartment and asked him to come to open the door. Upon entering the student's residence, everyone immediately smelled a foul odor. Life story. Lee Yoon Hee was a pretty and colorful girl. She originally studied fine arts and statistics at a women's university in Seoul. However, after graduation, she realized that she had chosen the wrong path. Since childhood, the protagonist loved animals, and even as an adult has 2 dogs for which she took care of with pleasure. Along with the craving for art, she liked to watch documentaries about nature, visit zoos, farms, and animal shelters. Therefore, having received a diploma, she was not afraid to start from the beginning and finally decided. At the age of 25, the girl decided to connect life with veterinary medicine. Parents did not immediately support their daughter. The traditional family believed that at such an age, it was time for her to get married and have children. However, Lee was a modern girl, so she wanted to build a career for a start. Therefore, in 2003, she entered the higher school of veterinary medicine. The new specialty liked the student and was given easily. At the same time, in order to be independent, she began to work part-time. Lately, the girl has been tutoring younger students, as well as children of teachers. In 2006, when the study was coming to an end, Lee was preparing for final exams. It is understandable that trying to combine study and work, she was very tired. But circumstances demanded it. A robbery. On June 2nd, Lee was returning home after a private class. She was walking at a slow pace, absorbed in her thoughts. Suddenly, 2 men on a motorcycle sped past her at breakneck speed. As she recovered from her fright, the student realized that the intruders had stolen her purse. Several witnesses to the incident tried to help and went after them. Their van managed to chase the motorcycle for a while. However, once the thieves turned down a narrow alley, the chase had to be called off. The culprits were not punished, and Yoon Hee was left without her important belongings. After that, she warned everyone she knew that she would be out of touch for a while. The girl was so upset that she told her friend, "I can't believe the world can be such a horrible place." However, at that moment, she didn't know even half of what she was going to experience. The situation at Lee's apartment. Lee's apartment was empty. What was noticeable was the mess made by the dogs. 2 puppies were lying on the floor. In the absence of water and food, they were dehydrated. Apparently, the animals were trying to find something to eat. Therefore, scraps of papers and clothes were lying everywhere. It became clear that the pets had not been walked for several days, hence the pungent odor that filled the room. Min noticed her friend's conspicuous backpack standing quietly in the corner of the room. Since it contained the essentials, Yoon Hee never went anywhere without it. This indicated that she left the apartment in a hurry or for a short time. The condition of the house did not seem suspicious to the police. At first glance, nothing was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. Therefore, assuming that the wanted girl had left voluntarily and would return soon, the police left. However, such arguments did not satisfy her friends. First, Lee would never in the world would not have left the animals to starve. Secondly, she could not disappear without telling anyone. So the company contacted Lee's family members. The family confirmed that they hadn't heard from her in days. Dissatisfied with the police officer's conclusion, Min and her friend went to the station.
Unfortunately, due to the slowness and poor handling of the investigation, Korean law enforcement agencies have been repeatedly admonished for their actions. So the young people decided to insist on their own and officially report their friend missing. Evidence. At this time, 2 of Lee's other friends stayed at the house. They wanted to wait for her parents and discuss everything. Not wanting to embarrass the missing person's relatives, the guys decided to clean up the apartment. They washed the floors, threw out the trash, and even washed dirty laundry. In general, destroyed all the evidence that had taken place. In addition, it was later learned that upon arrival, Lee's sister threw away the cigarette butt found on the veranda. She did so because she didn't want to embarrass her sister in front of her parents. They would be very upset to know that their daughter smokes. But the thing is, Yoon-hee's acquaintances unanimously claimed that they had never seen it. Perhaps in this way, another solid piece of evidence in the case was destroyed. Afterward, the guys were very sorry that wanting to do better only aggravated the situation. The young people explained that at that time the police had not taken up the investigation and had not warned them not to touch anything. When Lee's parents arrived in the evening, they inspected the apartment. Dong, the girl's father, reported that several other things were missing along with his daughter. The first thing he named was a hammer. The man explained that he personally insisted that such a necessary item was in the house. Lee Yoon-hee had always laughed about it and kept it in plain sight. The other missing item was an antique coffee table. The student was particularly fond of it, often eating at it and using it as a bedside table. It was unclear to everyone where the girl could have gone, as well as where 2 unrelated objects had disappeared to. The unknown painted a frightening picture. The last party. That day, in addition to the police report from Lee's friends, there was another one. The concerned parents of the missing girl decided not to delay. It was already obvious that enough time had passed since the alleged disappearance. She was last seen on June 5th. That was when Yoon-hee and her classmates finished their last practice of the semester. The young people were going to celebrate the significant event. For this purpose, they even invited the teachers. Obviously, not everyone agreed, but some still decided to keep company with a group of 40 students. The protagonist was upset that she had suffered another failure because of an unsuccessful, in her opinion, operation on an animal. Due to this, she had no desire to go to the party. Some even claimed that she locked herself in the restroom and cried. Perhaps before graduation, the diligent student simply lost her nerve. Therefore, she was so critical of herself and saw the world in pessimistic colors. Nevertheless, her friends managed to calm the girl down and persuade her to join the party at the karaoke bar. By 10 o'clock in the evening, Lee's mood had noticeably improved. Everyone gathered in the pub. They ate, drank, remembered university everyday life, danced and sang songs. They were supported by the heroine of the story. CCTV cameras recorded how at around 2:30 at night she left the toilet and left the celebration. It was noticeable that the girl was upset about something. However, the rapid departure was noticed by a 27-year-old guy named Kim and went after her. According to the man, he asked what happened. Since young people were close since their school years, Lee confessed and complained to her friend that someone was watching her in the toilet. However, she did not give any details. Kim was concerned for his friend. He knew that she was already frightened by the recent attack on the street, so he offered to carry her backpack and escort her home. Lee lived in a rented apartment about a 20-minute walk away. Kim later told investigators that he was unable to walk his buddy to the door. She said goodbye to him in one of the dark alleys. However, the young man still decided to wait until the lights came on in the windows of her house. After making sure that the girl was not threatened, he turned around and went to his house. It should be noted that the guy lived nearby. On June 6th, the country celebrated a national holiday, Memorial Day. Therefore, the absence of news from her did not seem strange to anyone. However, it was after the party that no one saw Yoon-hee. The beginning of the investigation. During the investigation, curious facts were established. On the morning of June 5th, about 4 o'clock the day before the disappearance, one of the classmates came to see Lee. He said that he was fixing a loose leg of the coffee table. He told the investigation that Lee did not want to throw it away, so she asked him to fix it. He stayed in the apartment for about half an hour, he said. After the short repair, the couple went to the university. He was not present during the celebration and never met Lee again. Some claim that the young people were in a romantic relationship, but there is no concrete evidence of this. In parallel, the relatives of the missing woman conducted their own search. One day, Lee's father, Dong, in search of any clues, explored the neighborhood where his daughter lived. Suddenly, between two garbage cans, the man noticed a familiar table. However, the tabletop and the unscrewed metal legs were lying separately. The relatives assumed that it was damaged during the events that took place in the apartment. The find was submitted for examination. It is quite possible that on the ill-fated night, Lee was the victim of a brutal attack. Her father was worried that she could have been killed because of the hammer he had given her. It is possible that the perpetrator, having gotten rid of the table, took the tool with him or hid it somewhere. Stalker theory. Amazingly, during the inspection of Lee Yoon-hee's home, the experts were unable to find any fingerprints, DNA, blood, or any other evidence. So thoroughly had Lee's friends cleaned the apartment. Therefore, the police decided to resort to searching for eyewitnesses. Since the walls of the apartment building were quite thin, someone could surely hear something. However, none of the girls' neighbors reported anything unusual. Many of the residents refused to engage in any conversation at all. At the same time, one elderly woman said that a few days before Lee's disappearance, she herself had been harassed. Someone, presumably a man, followed her to her front door and then stopped. The woman decided that opening the door would give a chance for an attack, so she turned sharply and came face to face with the stalker. She noted that the hood made it difficult to see his face. However, her actions frightened the unknown man. He turned around and left. It should be noted that in South Korea, pushing has become widespread. This term means unwanted, intrusive attention to one person by another or a group of people. Very often, law enforcement officers record reports of women who report repeated incidents. It is not uncommon for a stalker to stand at the door and wait before leaving. This further creates feelings of anxiety and fear. Often, sexual offenses are triggered by stalking. Therefore, on October 20th, 2022, a law came into effect that made stalking a crime. The sanction of the article provides for imprisonment for up to 3 years. Previously, it was qualified as a misdemeanor and punishable by a fine of $70. Some believe that a similar situation could have happened to our heroine. However, her case could end tragically. Later, this version found confirmation. In the house across the street, there is an apartment from which there is a clear view of Lee's windows. Whoever lived there could unobstructedly observe her actions. During the investigation, it turned out that the premises had been empty for a long time. However, an inspection revealed several empty cigarette packs and used tissues. Unfortunately, the DNA extracted was not suitable for examination. Nevertheless, it indicated that someone had visited the apartment periodically and stood at the window. The investigation is ongoing. Detectives interviewed all the party participants. Unfortunately, none of them knew what had happened to the girl during the celebration, much less after it, except perhaps Kim, who escorted her friend to the alley and waited until she went home. The sincerity of 21 people was tested on a lie detector. All of the subjects passed, but it is still worth noting that this method is not always reliable. However, the polygraph has been used in the country since 1950 and is trustworthy. In addition, task forces with search dogs searched the entire city, as well as the nearest mountains. Volunteers put up tens of thousands of flyers asking for any information. Later, Lee's parents sold all their property and offered 10 million won for information about their daughter's whereabouts. However, all was in vain. A new lead. The missing girl's family and acquaintances wanted to believe that she would return alive. Perhaps because of the stress of her experience, Yoon-hee decided to disappear for a while, forgetting her responsibilities to her parents and the pets she left at home. Maybe she's the one who threw away her favorite but broken table and her unwanted hammer. And there would be an innocent explanation for the dried napkins in the apartment across the street. But that last hope vanished as soon as the cybercrime experts got involved. They scrutinized Lee's computer and recovered the deleted files. Some gruesome details emerged. On June 6th at 2:59 a.m., about the same time the girl was supposed to return home, someone gained access to her desktop. He opened Naver, an internet portal used by 70% of the country's residents. He then typed the following phrases into the search: sexual harassment, contact the police, and 112. The work session ended at 3:02 a.m. The computer itself was manually shut down at 4:21 a.m. Specialists assumed that the missing student came home and sat down at the computer. Based on searches, she was sexually harassed at a party or on her way home. And since she didn't have a phone, she looked for a way to report it online. However, after 3 minutes, her actions were interrupted by someone. Experts also found out that on June 8th, between 3:15 in the afternoon and 5:21 in the afternoon, someone turned on the girl's computer again. At the same time, the unknown person deleted the history of messages in the messenger from 10:48 p.m. on June 4th until 3:04 a.m. on June 8th. To do this, he used a special program known in narrow circles. After it is not possible to restore the chat history. At the same time, it shows that a person who is well-versed in computers acted. 2 days later, someone again logged into Lee's account on a popular music site and even checked his email. Using the IP address, police were able to trace the location of the connection. It was a motel in the town of Kunsen, which is 119 miles away. After reviewing the CCTV cameras from that day, detectives found no signs of suspicious behavior or traces of the missing student. However, this fact indicated that she did not disappear of her own accord. Someone was skillfully cleaning up the traces of the crime that had been committed. The first person who comes to mind is Kim, who by a strange coincidence was at Lee's house at the time of the mass deletion of correspondence. If you remember, he stayed with a friend to wait for Yoon-hee's family to arrive and did some cleaning. This gave him the perfect opportunity and enough time to cover up the unwanted actions. Amazingly, when investigators asked the boys if they had turned on Lee's computer, both said they didn't remember. In fact, there were no witnesses, no traces, and no significant leads in the case of Lee Yoon-hee's disappearance. Possible evidence was destroyed during the cleaning and clearing of the chat history. Had the girl's body been found, it is almost certain that the perpetrator would have been caught. For the most part, the victim keeps key evidence of the crime. To this day, however, the student's whereabouts remain unknown, as does her condition. She is most likely dead, and her remains are safely hidden or managed to get rid of them forever. These circumstances lead to another version of what happened: a mad professor. It is known that the faculty where Lee studied collected animal carcasses. This was done so that students were engaged in autopsy and study. At the end of the study, the remains were collected and sent by the agency to a special incinerator. Before this, the biomass was packed in specialized bags. According to the company's rules, the collectors were not allowed to look into them. It should be noted that the sight is unpleasant, so they would not do it themselves. Approximately 88 pounds of animal remains are placed in the incinerator daily. However, investigators learned that 2 days after Yoon-hee's disappearance, about 242 pounds were incinerated. In other words, much more than usual. The educational institution worked on different animals: dogs, cats, pigs, and cows. However, according to the records of June 8th, there were no large animals. The dilemma arises: what else was burned that day? Could the extra weight have belonged to the missing student's body as well as other evidence? Unfortunately, this question remains unanswered. It was not possible to conduct a genetic examination, as all the ashes were destroyed. Assuming that Lee's body was indeed burned, it means that it was done by someone who killed her and had access to the room. For example, one of the faculty members, Professor Moon, was of great interest. The same man whose children Lee was studying with when her purse was stolen. During the interrogations, several people reported that Moon sometimes showed attention to a beautiful student. He openly flirted with her, unashamed of his status and age. The man was also present during the celebrations at that party and tried to sit next to Lee, but she moved away from him, calling him a creep. It was obvious that she was not accepting his advances. Initially, Moon said he left the event early and was home around 2 a.m. Then, when other detectives noticed that he had left after Lee, he changed his statement. It is quite possible that the professor molested her and then stalked her. Afraid of ruining his reputation, he may have silenced Yoon-hee. It's possible that he followed her that night, then broke into her apartment and killed her. Then he moved the body to the crematorium. He could also have taken the student to the campus by force and burned her alive. Either way, there's a lot of speculation. On the one hand, a stranger obsessed with Lee. He could have stolen her purse to get his hands on the object of his adoration and watched from the apartment across the street before or after the event. It is possible that it was he who attacked, kidnapped, or killed the poor girl. On the other hand, there are a lot of questions about her buddy Kim. Dong stated that there was a suspect they were sure of and pointed him out. There's no video footage of the young men walking home together after the party. Also, no one present saw Lee and Kim leave. It's hard to believe that the girl didn't want to be escorted all the way to the door and said goodbye in an alley at night.
Everyone knows that the guy has been in love with her since high school. There is an opinion that he even went to university because of her. At the same time, Lee sincerely trusted him and loved him in her own way, accepted his gifts, spent time with him. However, Lee's feelings were not what he would have wanted. Many joked that Kim became her third puppy. Later, one important detail came to light. It turns out that the young man knew the code from the door of the beloved. In her absence, he repeatedly came to the apartment, looked after the dogs. However, he did not tell about it, so as not to defame the girl in the eyes of others. By our standards, South Korea is still a rather strict country. At the same time, it looks suspicious. His motive could have been simple jealousy. He could have snapped when he found out Lee had a boyfriend. He may have secretly followed her and then went up to her apartment. There was an argument during which Kim broke the coffee table and took his girlfriend's life. He then decided to stay behind to clean up the crime scene. At the same time, no charges were brought against him. Moreover, in an interview, the lead detective hinted that he didn't think the guy was involved in the crime, and despite popular belief, the most likely suspect is Professor Moon. The man could have used his official position to lure a student he liked into the lab and do something terrible to her. As of 2017, Kim was married, had children, and his own business. Lee's father still accused him of being involved in his daughter's disappearance. He even organized several demonstrations outside the man's private clinic. To defend his honor, Jim was forced to file a defamation lawsuit. With the court's decision, Dong was banned from approaching Kim's building. To this day, the man claims that many media outlets have defamed his name. 18 years have passed, but the search for Lee still continues. In time, her photos and age image were made public. The missing person's parents have grown old. But before leaving this world, they want to calm down and know for sure whether their daughter is alive or not. Over time, any pain is dulled, even from the loss of a loved one. But there's nothing worse than being left in the dark for years. What do you guys think? Is Lee Yoon-hee alive? And if not, who really killed her?
Sometimes, till death do us part doesn't last long at all. Sweet, tender feelings can quickly turn into frustration, disappointment, and even outright hatred. In those cases, the most reasonable thing to do is end the relationship, if not as friends, then at least not as enemies. But when large sums of money and the chance to get rich fast enter the picture at the cost of an ex-lover's life, an unsuspecting person's fate could be sealed. Gary Bentley's case is hardly unique. People have been killed for far less, but in this instance, the killer was hoping to pocket $1 million and secure a life of ease and comfort. Did Gary himself sense what might happen? His parents think he did. They had a bad feeling and were worried about him, trying to protect him. But Gary couldn't fully believe that the love of his life, the mother of his child, was actually capable of murder. He fought hard to save his crumbling marriage for the sake of his son, but in the end, he ended up in the grave, and the boy was left an orphan, even though his mother was still alive. So, what do we know about Gary Bentley and his early life? Gary Louis Bentley was born on August 31st, 1984, in a small rural town called Louisville, located in Jefferson County, Kentucky. He was the youngest of two kids born to Gerald and Lisa Bentley. Gary grew up with his older sister Amy, and they had a close, trusting relationship from an early age. The Bentley family ran their own farm and worked hard to make sure their kids had everything they needed, including a good education. The kids pitched in too, and didn't shy away from the hard physical work that came with running a farm. The whole family was tight-knit, caring for each other and always offering support. From a young age, Gary spent a lot of time with his dad, Gerald. They were very close, often going fishing, hunting, and camping together. His dad taught him how to handle a gun, shared survival skills like how to navigate the wilderness, and showed him where to find edible mushrooms and berries. As a teenager, Gary developed a serious interest in firearms. He knew how to handle them and eventually started collecting guns. Nearly every weekend, he and his dad would go hunting or fishing, and they were best friends. Gary was the definition of a small-town guy, a real handyman who could build or fix just about anything. People around him would describe him as kind-hearted, easygoing, and always willing to help anyone in need. Gary did well in school, stayed away from bad influences, didn't have any bad habits, and never got into trouble with the law. He was a quiet, homebody type of kid who always put his family first. After high school, Gary went to college in the state capital, Frankfurt, where he majored in engineering. After graduating, he moved back to his hometown of Louisville, starting out as a basic electrician, but he quickly worked his way up the ladder. The one and only love. While in college, Gary met a girl named Tasha, who became the love of his life. She was about 1.5 years older than him, but the small age gap didn't bother them at all. They started dating pretty quickly and in 2006 moved in together, settling not far from Gary's parents' home. Tasha was studying to be a nurse and, after getting her degree, landed a job at one of the city's hospitals, where she quickly earned the respect and admiration of her co-workers. She didn't stop there, though. She decided to continue her education and kept working to advance her career. In 2012, Gary and Tasha finally made it official, throwing a big wedding and inviting all their family and friends. Soon after, Tasha got pregnant, and the couple was overjoyed. In the spring of 2013, they welcomed a baby boy and named him Connor. By the time their first child was born, both Gary and Tasha's careers were thriving. They were making good money and were able to move into a bigger, more comfortable home, buy 2 cars, travel, and basically live without worrying about money. Gary dreamed of having a big family and wanted at least 2 more kids with Tasha, but things started to fall apart just a few years later. What was Tasha hiding? The first 4 years of their marriage were perfect. People saw them as a model couple. They had respected, well-paying jobs, were amazing parents, good friends, and gracious hosts. The couple often threw parties at their home, inviting family and close friends. They were always the first to step up if someone needed help or support. Gary's parents, Gerald and Lisa, couldn't have been happier with their daughter-in-law and grandson. But in 2016, things started to change rapidly. The Bentley marriage hit a rough patch, and their relationship began to deteriorate. It all started when Tasha began having problems at work, something that had never happened before. She constantly complained about her coworkers, her boss, and the unbearable working conditions. Gary did his best to support her, but he advised her not to quit too quickly, since finding another job with a good salary wouldn't be easy. In the fall of 2016, trying to take a break and relieve some stress, the couple decided to go on vacation. They left their son with Gary's parents and flew to a resort. they went to Jamaica with their longtime friends, Annie and Kevin Day, who they had been close with for years. The first few days of the trip were perfect. They all had fun, relaxed on the beach, explored the island, and enjoyed each other's company. But Tasha seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. She was constantly texting someone and got very defensive if anyone asked her who she was talking to. The longer they stayed on the island, the more Gary and Tasha started arguing. According to their friends, the fights seemed to come out of nowhere and quickly escalated into full-blown arguments, which made Annie and Kevin uncomfortable. One day, during a yacht trip, Gary and Tasha got into yet another argument, and to ease the tension, Kevin tried to make a joke. In response, Gary splashed beer in his face. Kevin didn't take it too personally, understanding that Gary's reaction wasn't really about the joke, but more about the stress caused by Tasha. Gary, feeling embarrassed afterward, apologized several times, admitting he didn't know what came over him. The new job. Shortly after they returned home from vacation, Tasha told Gary she had quit her job. Gary wasn't happy about her decision since losing such a good income could hurt their family's financial situation. However, being a responsible and frugal person, he had some savings that could help them get by and maintain their lifestyle until she found another job. But just a day after quitting, Tasha was hired as a consultant at a big pharmaceutical company. This was odd because she hadn't mentioned finding a job before quitting. It seemed like someone might have helped her land the position, but Tasha brushed it off as pure luck, saying she stumbled across the interview by chance. Although Tasha seemed happy with her new job, things didn't get better at home. She was rarely around, stopped cooking, didn't take care of the house, and showed little interest in what was going on with Gary. She even neglected their son, leaving most of the parenting to his grandparents. On the weekends, Mrs. Bentley started leaving town, saying she had work trips. She was constantly on the phone with someone, always finding a private spot so no one could overhear the conversation. When asked, she insisted it was work-related and that she needed to discuss things with her colleagues or bosses. She also put a password on her phone, something she had never done before, so no one could check it. She became secretive and distant. Gary, on the other hand, was the one taking care of their son, pouring all his love and attention into him. He practically lived for the boy, spending all his free time with him and doing everything possible to make sure he didn't feel neglected. Despite the constant fights and his wife's indifference, Gary still loved her and hoped to save their marriage, if only for their child's sake. Family trip to Mexico. Gary's parents, seeing the tension building in their son's family, decided to surprise him, Tasha, and their grandson with a trip to one of the most beautiful resorts in Mexico. They chose a cozy hotel in a secluded area, hoping it would give them a peaceful environment to reconnect and spend quality time together. There wasn't much cell service there, and the internet was weak and often cut out. This allowed the family to enjoy each other's company, hang out at the beach, and take long walks. However, Tasha was visibly frustrated by the lack of connectivity. She was always trying to make phone calls or find a signal to send messages. She got angry, lashing out at Gary and his parents, even yelling at their young son. Gary's dad, Gerald, found her behavior strange and decided to have an honest talk with his son. He shared his suspicion that Tasha might be having an affair. Gary tried to laugh it off, but from the look in his eyes, Gerald could tell his son had the same thoughts, but was trying to pretend everything was fine. The couple argued every day, and Tasha demanded they cut the vacation short and return home, citing some urgent work matters. Eventually, she packed her bags and announced she would fly back alone. This forced the rest of the family to leave early with her, even though their stay at the hotel was paid for another week, and they didn't get any refunds. A strange string of fires. In the spring of 2017, Tasha called her father-in-law, Gerald, sounding distressed. She asked him to come help her and pick her up. She explained that her car had caught fire at a gas station and was completely destroyed. She needed to go to her insurance company and then head back home. Of course, Gerald rushed to help her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. This was the third time in the years she had been with Gary that one of her cars had mysteriously burned up. Each time it happened at a gas station, and the car was reduced to nothing but scrap metal, making it impossible to determine the real cause of the fire. Every time, the incidents were blamed on faulty gas station equipment, and Tasha always received hefty insurance payouts. These fires happened about every 3 years, and Tasha would insure the cars for the maximum amount just before the fires occurred, always using different insurance companies. She claimed to have no idea how it happened, and some friends and family even thought she might have enemies who were purposely sabotaging her cars. Still, after each accident, Tasha bought a newer, more expensive car. The insurance companies had no grounds to deny her claims, even though the fires followed a suspicious pattern. Proving deliberate property damage was next to impossible. The not-so-secret affair. By the summer of 2017, Tasha was disappearing almost every weekend, explaining it as work trips. She became more distant from Gary and their son, living what seemed like a separate life. Friends, family, and even the Bentley's neighbors began to suspect that Tasha was having an affair. These rumors hit Gary hard. He stopped trying to joke about it and would either stay quiet or quickly change the subject. Gary's parents tried several times to talk to him, telling him that things couldn't go on like this since, essentially, the marriage had already fallen apart. But Gary always responded the same way. He still loved his wife and was determined to keep the family together for Connor's sake. He held on to the hope that Tasha would come to her senses, reconsider her priorities, and that things would go back to the way they were. In November 2017, Gary, Tasha, and their son went to his parents' house to celebrate Thanksgiving. Gary's sister, Amy, also came with her family. When everyone started exchanging gifts, it turned out that Tasha hadn't bought any, saying she was too busy with work. She apologized and left, promising to fix it and return soon. She was gone for hours, but came back empty-handed, without buying anything, not even for her son. When everyone gave her confused looks, she claimed the lines everywhere were too long, and it would have taken her all night to get through them. This time, Amy couldn't hold back. She pulled Gary aside and asked him point-blank if he realized that Tasha was probably seeing someone else and wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Gary simply responded that they would handle it themselves. A gun safe in the bedroom. The following weekend, Gary called his dad and asked him to come over and bring some tools. Gerald was happy to help and showed up at his son's house within half an hour with everything needed. As mentioned earlier, Gary had been collecting guns since his youth, and his house was filled with pistols, hunting rifles, shotguns, and more. He even had some rare items scattered across different rooms. But now, Gary suddenly decided to install a safe in his house, gather up all his firearms, and lock them away. This sudden decision worried Gerald a little, so he asked Gary why he suddenly wanted to hide his gun collection. Gary didn't give a clear answer, but Gerald could tell his son was afraid of something, and it didn't seem like he was worried about burglars. Later, when Tasha got home, she explained that it was her idea because she was scared and felt like they might be in danger. Her words seemed strange, but at the time, Gerald didn't think much of it. Only a few days remained before the tragedy. The mysterious murder at home. On Sunday, December 10th, 2017, Tasha called her father-in-law, telling him she hadn't been able to reach Gary all day, and when she got home, the garage door was open. She was too scared to go inside, worried that burglars might have broken in, and asked Gerald to come over. Thankfully, Connor was safe, staying with his grandparents, and Gary was home alone. Gerald rushed over as fast as he could. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The garage door was indeed ajar, but there were no signs of forced entry. Inside the house, everything looked normal. Nothing appeared to be missing, and there were no indications of an intruder. Gerald called out to his son several times, but there was no response. When he walked into the bedroom, he found Gary's lifeless body lying on the bed. In shock, Gerald tried to perform CPR, but Gary's body was already cold, showing signs of rigor mortis. He immediately called 911, still unable to believe his son was gone. It wasn't until later that he noticed the gun safe in the bedroom had been broken into and some of the firearms were missing. The forensic findings. When the forensic team arrived, they determined that Gary had been killed by a single gunshot to the head, fired at close range. Since he was lying on his side in bed in a sleeping position and had no other injuries or signs of a struggle, it was likely that he was asleep and didn't even hear the killer approach. The crime didn't look like a typical robbery. Valuables, a jewelry box, and even cash left in plain sight were untouched. This indicated that the main target was the gun safe. However, only a few guns were taken, none of which were particularly valuable. Neither these nor the guns that remained were the murder weapon. The main suspect. From the start of the investigation, Gary's wife, Tasha, was the primary suspect. For one, she didn't seem like a grieving widow. She calmly spoke with the detectives, detailing the day's events leading up to when she and her father-in-law found the body. Second, all of the couple's friends and family confirmed that Gary and Tasha's marriage had been on the rocks for a while, and they were close to divorce. Third, the Bentleys had 2 large dogs that barked at anyone but their owners, yet the neighbors hadn't heard any barking, and Gary would have likely woken up from the noise if they had. Tasha claimed that Gary had planned to go hunting that day, and she had left the house to run some errands. She said that she'd tried to call him after lunch, but she hadn't been able to get through. Not too concerned, she chalked it up to bad reception. On her way home, she stopped by a friend's house, which her friends confirmed when questioned. There were no witnesses to the crime. No one heard anything suspicious or saw any strangers that day. Even surveillance footage from nearby cameras yielded no useful clues. The crime appears to have been a carefully planned crime, unsuccessfully staged as a robbery. A $1 million insurance policy. Annie Day, one of Tasha's friends, called her to offer her condolences and ask if she could help with funeral arrangements. Tasha's response stunned Annie. She said that Gary's parents were handling the funeral because she had more important things to take care of. Those more important things turned out to be a trip to the insurance company for a large payout. Apparently, shortly before the murder, Tasha had convinced Gary to take out a $1 million life insurance policy. Gary, in an effort to please his wife, agreed, although he wasn't thrilled about it. A few days before the crime, Tasha tried to increase the payout to $2 million, but she failed. Now there was a clear motive. However, there was still no hard evidence linking Tasha to the murder. At the same time, details surfaced about her 3 previous burned-out cars, each of which had resulted in large insurance payouts. It became clear that Tasha had pulled similar insurance tricks before. Lover or accomplice? One of Tasha's friends said that Tasha had been dating a co-worker named Anthony for over a year, and he was the one who helped her get a new job. Investigators decided to question Anthony about his involvement in the crime, suspecting that he may have helped his lover. Anthony admitted that he had a long-standing romantic relationship with Tasha and revealed that they met regularly at his home. He claimed that Tasha was planning to leave Gary, and they even planned to celebrate New Year's Eve 2018 together. When Anthony realized that he was being considered as a suspect in the murder investigation, he rushed to provide an alibi. He stated that on the day of the murder, he was at his parents' house helping them with renovations. They made several trips to thrift stores that day, all of which were captured on surveillance cameras. Detectives concluded that Tasha had likely acted alone, which explained why there were no signs of a break-in and why the dogs hadn't barked. but the murder weapon and the missing guns from the safe remained a mystery. Tasha's version of events. Tasha kept changing her story, adding new details, and sometimes trying to shift the blame onto others. She even brought up the conflict between Gary and Kevin Day during their vacation when Gary threw beer in his friend's face. According to Tasha, Kevin might have held a grudge and used this as an opportunity for revenge. However, a few hours into her interrogation, Tasha finally cracked and confessed. She admitted to killing her husband, but blamed Gary for what happened. Tasha claimed that Gary was abusive, both to her and their son, and that on the day of the murder, he had once again hit their child. She said that was the last straw, and after waiting for Gary to fall asleep, she grabbed a gun. However, none of Tasha's claims were backed up. None of Tasha's friends or family supported her claims. In fact, everyone stood by Gary, saying he was a devoted, loving husband and the most caring father they had ever known. They insisted he would never lay a hand on his wife, let alone their young son, whom he adored. Even the child confirmed that his dad had never hurt him or his mom. Tasha eventually revealed the hiding spot where she had stashed the guns taken from the safe, including the murder weapon, a pistol. Interestingly, the gun had Anthony's fingerprints on it. As it turned out, Tasha had given the gun to her lover to hold, leaving his prints behind. Her plan was to frame him if things didn't go as expected, but she confessed before she could put that part of the plan into action. Trial and sentencing. The trial for Gary's murder began in June 2021. According to the prosecution, the primary motive for the crime was money. Tasha hoped to collect the $1 million insurance payout and planned to use part of that money to renovate Anthony's house, where she intended to move in the near future. On July 20th, 2021, Tasha Bentley was found guilty of premeditated murder and attempting to mislead the investigation. She was sentenced to 55 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 2037. As for little Connor, who lost both his father and mother in one tragic moment, he is now being raised by his paternal grandparents. This crime was featured on an episode of Investigation Discovery titled American Monster.
The Summer Baldwin case, buried in suitcases. In the world of criminal investigations, when two or more crimes share similar characteristics, experts often link them as part of a series. It can take years to identify and apprehend serial criminals. Most criminals have experienced violence and abuse as children, and some have varying degrees of mental illness. Nevertheless, they are aware of their actions. To the outside world, these people often seem perfectly normal, so much so that those around them don't notice that they are facing a ruthless killer. Such was the case with Rosendo Rodriguez, an outwardly unassuming young man who served in the U.S. Marine Corps. Witnesses who knew him personally and testified at his trial described him as a friendly, responsible, and good-hearted man who wouldn't hurt a fly. However, it emerged that he had brutally taken the lives of two young women and disposed of their bodies in a particularly extravagant and unusual way. Looking ahead, I will say that this man was justly punished for his heinous deeds. But let's start from the beginning to understand this loud and complex case, learn about his victims, and dive into the childhood of the criminal to understand how he turned into a monster, a naked beauty in a suitcase. This chilling tale began on September 13, 2005, in the outskirts of Lubbock, Texas. A city utility worker performing routine duties at a local landfill noticed an unusual object amid the typical array of colorful trash, a large black suitcase that seemed oddly intact and bulky. Curiosity piqued. He opened the suitcase, hoping perhaps to find something valuable. To his horror, the first thing he saw upon unzipping it was a woman's manicured hand. Initially, he couldn't believe it was a real human body and not a doll or mannequin. On fully opening the suitcase, he discovered the naked body of a young woman, her knees drawn up to her chest, arms crossed around her neck. The worker immediately halted the garbage truck that had brought the grisly suitcase and called the police. The landfill was quickly cordoned off, and the truck and its contents were thoroughly examined. Finding any clues in a vast city dump was nearly impossible, but the investigators hoped to at least uncover hints about the woman's identity and how she ended up there in such a state. No identification or personal items were found in the suitcase. The only distinctive feature on the body was a small tattoo on the leg with the word "Summer." The medical examiners now faced the task of determining the cause of death, while forensic experts needed to identify the victim and track down her killer. An autopsy revealed multiple injuries inflicted while the woman was alive, including signs of sexual violence. However, the cause of death was positional asphyxiation. She was still alive when placed in the suitcase, but suffocated due to the confined space. By the time her body was found, she had been deceased for approximately a day. Fingerprint analysis uploaded to the national database in the United States identified the victim as 29-year-old Summer Lee Baldwin. Who was Summer Baldwin? Summer Baldwin, born in 1976 in Washington, was known for her sweet, kind, and open nature. She was a bright student with a vibrant personality and many friends. Dreaming of an acting career, Summer had high aspirations for her life. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in community college, but university studies were difficult for her. Friends invited her to Texas for a change of scenery and opportunities. Summer moved to Lubbock with the support of her parents, hoping to start her life with a clean slate. It is unknown when Summer's life spiraled, but she gradually became addicted to alcohol and illicit drugs without seeking help from her family. Over time, her addiction worsened, leading to job loss and connections with people with criminal records. Her acting dreams were dashed, and she eventually began working as an escort to support herself. Unaware of their daughter's problems, Summer's parents thought she was leading a successful life. They were devastated when the police informed them of her tragic death in September 2005.
The information they provided about Summer's friends and hangouts was limited. Notably, a few months before her death, Summer was a key witness in an important federal counterfeiting case. This suggested that her murder may have been a contract killing by a criminal gang, which drew the attention of the FBI and put the investigation under special scrutiny. The investigation and the first suspects. The first person called in for questioning by the police was Rebecca, best friend of the deceased Summer Baldwin. Rebecca shed light on Summer's occupation and mentioned several of her boyfriends, one of whom behaved aggressively, often raised his hand to her and persistently stalked her after their breakup. That man became the first suspect in the case. Summer's ex-boyfriend was detained and brought to the station the same day, but he categorically denied his involvement in the case. Moreover, he seemed genuinely surprised and upset by the news of her death. He had a solid alibi. The night before the tragedy, he had been involved in a drunken brawl in a bar and spent the night in a cell with another troublemaker. As a result, the police had to release the first and only suspect at the time. Another friend and, so to speak, colleague of the deceased provided the investigation with much more important information. According to a woman named Marjorie, she saw Summer the evening before the murder, and they even exchanged a few words. They met on September 11th in the parking lot of a convenience store. Marjorie recounted that a red van pulled up to the store, from which a young, fit man of Latino appearance got out and went inside, presumably to shop. In the meantime, Summer, seeing her friend, came out from the passenger side to greet her. She told Marjorie that he was her client, with whom she had been meeting for the second time in recent days. After the man came out of the store, he got behind the wheel, and Summer hurried back into the van. Marjorie then went about her business and didn't see which direction the van drove off, nor did she know where the couple planned to have their rendezvous. She added that she had never seen the man before and assumed he was not a local. The only description she could provide was that he had very short hair, like a military man, due to the darkness outside and her inability to see him clearly. What's wrong with the suitcase? The suitcase, which became a young woman's coffin, appeared quite odd. Externally, it was smeared with garbage and waste, yet it wasn't worn out, and its wheels looked new. Inside, all tags were in perfect condition, and the lining seemed as if the item was brand new. Moreover, even the plastic attachment for the price tag was intact, suggesting that the person who bought the suitcase hadn't removed it. It was established that suitcases of this brand were sold in dozens of stores throughout the city. but this particular large model was available only in 2 stores. Thanks to the perfectly preserved barcode, it was discovered that a pair of identical suitcases were sold the day before the grim discovery at a Walmart store in the same area of the city where the girl was last seen alive. The first purchase was made after noon, and the second around 2 in the morning, which was quite strange and suspicious. Police officers immediately went there and requested the store's surveillance camera footage. Upon reviewing the material, they found that the first suitcase was bought by an elderly couple. These people were not initially suspicious, but they were located, and they could present the suitcase and explained that they bought it for a vacation trip. The second suitcase, however, was bought by a young man of Latino appearance, athletic build, and with very short hair, like a military man's. Suspicions arose that this was the person mentioned by the witness who saw him in the company of the deceased girl in the parking lot of the supermarket. Moreover, the man also bought a pair of disposable gloves at the checkout. Further information was provided by the external surveillance cameras installed in the store's parking lot. They showed the man exiting with the suitcase in hand and loading it into a red van. Too many coincidences led the police to believe they had found their man, and all that remained was to establish his identity, locate, and bring him in for questioning. Hunt for the stranger. The man was extremely cautious, using cash instead of a card to avoid leaving any personal data. However, he didn't account for the surveillance cameras in the parking lot, which captured his vehicle's license plate number perfectly. Police quickly identified the vehicle as a rental in the name of Rosendo Rodriguez, a U.S. Marine Corps reservist. Rodriguez had no criminal record and hadn't previously come to police attention. He was in Lubbock for a few days with his unit for training. Finding Rodriguez immediately was challenging as he wasn't at the hotel where his unit stayed. However, police had his details and discovered he had withdrawn a large sum of cash from an ATM at another hotel, likely the money used to pay for the suitcase and gloves. Rodriguez hadn't stayed at the hotel where he used the ATM. Instead, someone named Thomas Rodriguez, matching Rosendo's description, had checked in on September 11th. It turned out to be the same person using a different name for unknown reasons. Luck favored the investigation. The hotel room rented by Rodriguez, which he had already checked out of, hadn't been cleaned yet, yielding crucial evidence. There were brown stains and splatters on the carpet, bed, and walls that resembled dried blood. A tag from a new suitcase was found near the bed, and the trash contained used contraceptives and disposable gloves. Forensic analysis confirmed the dried blood in the room belonged to Summer, and DNA on the contraceptives and gloves matched both Summer and Rodriguez. There was no doubt they had found the murderer, but by then, Rodriguez had already left the city. However, with all necessary information, tracking him down was straightforward. Rosendo Rodriguez III was born on March 26, 1980, in Wichita Falls, Texas, into a poor family of Mexican immigrants. Reports suggest that he experienced violence and harsh treatment in his early childhood. His father, described as domineering and aggressive, struggled with alcoholism and frequently abused his wife and children. During his childhood, Rosendo also displayed aggression, often getting into fights at school. However, as he grew older, he learned to control his anger. After high school, he attended Texas Tech University and moved away from his parents. Living independently, he worked various jobs, including at a pizzeria, as a courier, and as an office clerk, before deciding to serve in the U.S. Marine Corps. Colleagues in the military described Rodriguez as quiet, balanced, disciplined, and responsible. He was seen as a good friend, always ready to help, well-educated, and physically attractive, making him popular with women. Rodriguez was arrested on September 15th at his home in San Antonio. When police arrived, he was calm and seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation. During the search, a striped shirt and shorts were found, matching the outfit he wore when purchasing the suitcase caught on surveillance footage. Additionally, his laptop and mobile phone were seized, interrogations, and Rodriguez's version. For the first few weeks, Rosendo remained silent and denied involvement in Summer Baldwin's murder. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, so following his attorney's advice, he started giving statements with his version of events, which differed significantly from the scenario built by the forensic experts. Rodriguez began by explaining that he had accidentally booked a hotel separate from his fellow servicemen. He knew only the name of the hotel chain they were supposed to stay at, chose a hotel randomly, and only after checking in did he realize the rest were at a different location. He chose not to relocate as the military leadership indicated it wasn't necessary. He failed to explain why he registered under a different name. On the morning of September 10th, Rodriguez rented a van for convenience around the city. That evening, he claimed to have met Summer Baldwin by chance. According to him, he saw a blonde woman sitting on a bench by the road, covering her face with her hands as if she was crying. Intrigued and concerned, he stopped to check if she was okay and needed help. They struck up a conversation. She calmed down, and then they went to his hotel room where they talked and drank a bit, but did not become intimate. The next morning, Rosendo drove her home, but they agreed to meet in the evening. He picked her up at the same place around 9 p.m. and went to a supermarket, where Summer saw her friend Marjorie. They then returned to the hotel, where Rodriguez said there was consensual intimacy between them. Afterward, however, Rodriguez said Summer became aggressive and demanded money, which surprised him because he did not realize he was with a call girl. When he refused, she allegedly pulled a knife out of her purse and began threatening him. He disarmed her and punched her in the face, causing her nose to bleed. Rodriguez claims he did not intend to harm her, but acted in self-defense. Moments later, Summer collapsed on the bed and convulsed, foaming at the mouth. He stated that he tried to help her, but refrained from mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because of the blood and foam on her face. After a minute, she stopped breathing. Realizing she was dead, he panicked. He went to the nearest store, bought a suitcase and gloves, returned to the hotel, put her body in the suitcase and threw it in the dumpster, knowing that it would be taken to the landfill the next morning. He then checked out of the hotel, returned the rental car, and drove home to San Antonio as if nothing had happened. Inconsistencies in the suspect's story. Investigators immediately realized that Rosendo Rodriguez was lying because there were numerous inconsistencies in his story. For example, Marjorie, who met Summer in the parking lot the night of the crime, claimed that Summer told her explicitly that the man was a client of hers with whom they had previously had a paid meeting. Rodriguez claims that everything between them was consensual, but evidence on Summer's body indicates that she was taken advantage of. It is likely that their first night was indeed consensual, which is why Summer agreed to meet him again. Moreover, Rodriguez claimed that he only hit Summer in the face once to calm her down, but she died of a seizure. However, an autopsy found about 30 fresh bruises on Baldwin's head and body on the night of the crime, and several stab wounds. In addition, she was alive when he packed her in the suitcase, contradicting his claim that she was already dead. Another girl in a suitcase. During an investigation at Rodriguez's residence, police seized his laptop computer. A review of his search history revealed a disturbing pattern. In the 3 days prior to his arrest, Rodriguez had been actively searching for information about a girl named Summer, paying attention to whether there was an ongoing search for her and whether her body had been found in a landfill. Interestingly, Rodriguez also frequently searched for Joanna Catherine Rogers, a 16-year-old girl from Lubbock who went missing a year and a half ago. When authorities offered Rodriguez a plea bargain in exchange for information about Joanna's fate, a deal that included a reduced sentence and avoided the death penalty, he reluctantly accepted and told his story. He met Joanna, a high school student in Lubbock, in late April 2004. After a few meetings, they went to his hotel room on May 4th. The situation turned tragic when, after an argument over money and threats of a lawsuit for rape, Rodriguez panicked and covered Joanna's mouth to silence her and inadvertently caused her death. In a desperate attempt to dispose of the body, Rodriguez put it in his own suitcase and threw it in a dumpster. This method replicates the disposal of Summer's body a year and a half later. Rodriguez initially confessed to these actions, but later recanted his testimony, claiming coercion. Realizing the need to find Joanna's body to strengthen the case, police undertook a massive search of the city dump. More than a year later, they miraculously found a suitcase containing Joanna's remains. Despite severe decomposition, DNA testing confirmed the identity of the remains. This evidence allowed authorities to charge Rodriguez as a serial offender, committing similar heinous crimes with a consistent modus operandi. trial, verdict, and execution. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the gravity of his crimes, defendant Rosendo Rodriguez hoped to avoid the death penalty until the last moment, expecting a life sentence with the possibility of parole. However, the court decided otherwise.
The decisive factor was the fact that Summer Baldwin was 3 months pregnant at the time of her tragic death. This aggravating factor was decisive, and the court found Rodriguez guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to death by lethal injection. Rodriguez and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, citing errors and misconduct by investigators, but all were rejected. While in prison awaiting execution, Rodriguez even maintained his own blog on criminal justice and policy issues. On March 27, 2018, nearly 10 years after being convicted of his heinous crimes, Rosendo Rodriguez was finally executed. This occurred the day after his 38th birthday. The death sentence was carried out in the Huntsville prison in Texas. This execution was the 4th in Texas and the 7th in the United States for the year 2018.
Every parent, in an attempt to protect and keep their child safe, tries to explain that trusting strangers can be dangerous. They emphasize that you shouldn't talk to strangers, follow them somewhere, and under no circumstances should you ever get into a stranger's car. Having these conversations is crucial, just like explaining the reasons behind these precautions and the potential consequences of ignoring them. The story of an American high school student named Abigail Hernandez serves as a powerful lesson, illustrating what can happen when you're careless and too trusting of a stranger who, at first glance, seems to offer a helping hand during a tough situation. All Abigail did was hope that a kind guy would give her a ride home, but instead, she ended up in the lair of a real monster. Abigail Hernandez, family and early life. Abigail, or simply Abby. Maria Hernandez was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, along the banks of the Merrimack River. She was the youngest of 2 daughters born to Ruben and Xenia Hernandez, and grew up with her older sister Sarah, to whom she was very close. Abby's mom worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her dad was a sales agent. Overall, the Hernandez family was strong, happy, and pretty well off, but when Abby was in middle school, her parents decided to separate. Not long after the divorce, her father remarried and started a new family, while the daughters from his first marriage continued to live with their mom. Ruben still supported his older children financially, but their relationship dwindled to little more than birthday and Christmas greetings. From a young age, Abby was an active, curious, and social child. She always had a ton of friends, and she constantly shifted between different hobbies and activities, eager to try everything and be everywhere. Abby played sports, was a talented artist, enjoyed photography, read a lot, and studied foreign languages, which she picked up effortlessly. Around the age of 12, Abby became a member of a local outdoor club, regularly going on camping trips, hiking, and falling in love with the mountains. She also became pretty skilled in wilderness survival, putting those lessons to good use on various adventures. It's not surprising, considering New Hampshire's natural beauty, with its forests, mountains, and rivers. It's a paradise for outdoor activities, hiking, and climbing. This is a state that attracts adventurers, thrill seekers, and nature lovers from all over the country. Abigail Hernandez's classmates described her as a brave, smart, friendly, and determined girl who could easily connect with people around her. She was the kind of person who could jump into a conversation about pretty much any topic, wasn't afraid of challenges, and always spread her optimism to everyone around her. Abby wasn't one to sit still. She was always on the go, constantly moving, and making big plans for her future. The summer of 2013 was packed with exciting events for Abigail. When she returned to school in September, she was full of stories about her summer vacation, where she'd been, what she'd seen, and all the things she'd managed to do. By this time, the 14-year-old had started a romantic relationship with a boy named Jimmy, who went to the same school and was a year older than her. Xenia, Abby's mom, knew about the relationship and didn't mind her daughter dating him. Vanished on her way home from school. In early October 2013, with fall break and her 15th birthday just around the corner, Abigail was busy planning a hiking trip with other members of her outdoor club. She'd even received a pair of brand new hiking boots as a gift. But they were a little tight, so she decided to break them in by wearing them to school. On October 9th, Abby went to school like any other day. After classes, she planned to take a stroll through a nearby park, but promised her mom she wouldn't be out too late. However, by around 5 p.m., when Abby still hadn't come home, Xenia decided to call her, only to find that Abby's phone was turned off. Worried but trying to stay calm, Xenia figured her daughter had probably met up with friends and maybe her phone had died. A couple of hours later, with no word from Abby and unable to reach her, Xenia started to panic. She began calling Abby's friends and teachers, trying to find out when she had left school and where she might have gone. The school informed her that Abby had left right after classes ended and had said goodbye to her friends at the bus stop, where they all got on the school bus. Abby, however, had chosen to walk home. None of Abby's friends had seen her since. She hadn't stopped by anyone's house, and she hadn't called anyone. Even Jimmy couldn't get in touch with her, despite them having plans to meet up later that day. Terrified, Xenia, along with her older daughter Sarah, didn't waste any time and headed straight to the police station to report Abby's disappearance. Since Abby was a minor, the search for her began immediately. Investigators discovered that the last signal from her cell phone was picked up about a mile from her home. Almost immediately, news about the missing high school student started spreading across social media. Flyers with Abby's photo, a description of the clothes she was wearing, and a contact number for any tips about her whereabouts were quickly printed and distributed. By the next morning, a story about the missing girl was aired during the 7 a.m. news, urging anyone with information to come forward. Hundreds of police officers, volunteers, and concerned citizens joined the search for the 14-year-old. They scoured local parks, empty lots, wooded areas, bodies of water, and abandoned buildings. Law enforcement explored various leads, searched for possible witnesses, and interviewed Abby's friends and family. But every effort turned up empty. The first suspect. Detectives investigating the case tried to find out if Abby had any enemies, grudges, or perhaps an overly persistent admirer. But everyone who knew Abby insisted that she was always the life of the party, a friendly, open, and kind-hearted girl who didn't have any adversaries. She never got into conflicts, and none of her friends had ever heard of anyone stalking or harassing her. One of the first people detectives interviewed was Abigail's boyfriend, Jimmy, who quickly became the prime suspect. They questioned him about whether there had been any disagreements or arguments between them, whether he had any reason to be upset with her, or if he might have had any motive to harm her. But Jimmy seemed stunned by the questions, baffled as to why he was under suspicion, and couldn't fathom how anyone could think he would want to hurt his girlfriend. Jimmy had a rock-solid alibi for the time Abby went missing, which was backed up not just by his family but also by his teachers and about a dozen friends. That day, his schedule was packed. School, sports practice, rehearsals for an upcoming performance with his school band, and his grandfather's birthday party, all of which he attended without missing a beat. Jimmy fully cooperated with the investigation, telling police everything he knew, but it didn't help move the case forward. It was as if Abby had vanished into thin air. Despite months of searching, there wasn't a single clue or even a hint about where to look next. Detectives understood that the chances of finding the teenager alive were dwindling, but Abby's family refused to give up hope. The mysterious letter and a surprising theory. About a month and a half after Abigail's disappearance, her mother found a strange letter from her missing daughter in the mailbox at their home. In the letter, Abby asked for forgiveness for what she had done, said that she was okay, healthy, and safe. She wrote that she loved her mom and Sarah but couldn't reveal where she was. At the end of the message, there was a cryptic and rather puzzling phrase, "Dreams come true." Handwriting analysis confirmed that the letter was indeed written by Abby, and it was dated to early November, which meant there was a high likelihood that the teenager was still alive. But where could she be, and why couldn't she explain the real reason for her disappearance? Was she scared, or had someone forced her to write that letter? Immediately, a theory emerged, suggesting that Abigail had voluntarily run away from home, but saw the news story about herself and decided to let her family know she was alive. There was speculation that Abby might have been pregnant and had run off with the baby's father, afraid of facing her family's anger and the judgment of others. However, the Hernandez family was outraged by this pregnancy and runaway theory. Sarah firmly stated that if her younger sister had been expecting a baby, she would have been the first to know, as they were always very close and had no secrets from each other. Besides, Abby's only boyfriend was Jimmy, and according to him, they hadn't even been intimate yet. They were both still virgins. Abby's friends backed this up, confirming that she hadn't dated anyone other than Jimmy, and had never mentioned having any other crushes or relationships. Her best friend Miranda was also adamant that Abby couldn't have been pregnant and would never have run away, causing so much pain to her mom and older sister. Plus, all of Abby's documents, personal savings, and valuable belongings were still at home. Investigators thoroughly examined and analyzed the letter, hoping to find any clues or hints about where to look for the girl. Unfortunately, there were no hidden messages or cries for help. Despite this, the FBI got involved in the case, classifying it as an abduction. They believed Abby was being held against her will, and that the letter had been written under strict orders, with no chance to reveal her location. It turned out to be an accurate assumption, as the kidnapper and his victim were just a few dozen miles away from the Hernandez home. What's even more disturbing is that police had visited the kidnapper's house multiple times since Abby's disappearance, but found nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, the man himself felt tracked and frantically thought about what to do with his captive. Who is Nathaniel Kibbe? Now it's time to introduce the kidnapper himself. Nathaniel, or just Nate. Kibbe was born on July 15, 1980, in the same town as Abby. There isn't much reliable information about his family, but some sources suggest that he was raised by his mom alone and never knew his biological father. In his school years, Nate was a real troublemaker, a bully, and that one kid everyone was scared of. He constantly got into fights and clashed with those around him. Even more unsettling, he kept a list of people he disliked, people he planned to beat up or harm in some way. From a young age, he displayed aggression and cruelty toward others, making his peers avoid him while teachers struggled to handle his behavior. As a teenager, young Kibbe caught the attention of the police several times for different offenses. He was part of a gang, which he took great pride in, had a fascination with firearms, and knew a lot about them. He had multiple run-ins with the law for assault causing serious injuries, illegal possession of substances, and petty theft, but he always got off with just a slap on the wrist. Interestingly, Nate had attended the same high school as Abby, but since he was 18 years older than her, they never crossed paths, either in or outside of school. After finishing high school, it seemed like Nathaniel decided to turn his life around and leave his criminal activities behind. He got a job at a local business where, in general, his co-workers and management were generally positive about him. But a couple of years later, after a serious conflict, Nate quit, moved to the suburbs, and settled in a trailer park in a far from prosperous neighborhood. Neighbors thought he was strange and tried not to get involved with this irascible and aggressive guy. In 2011, Kibbe, who by then was already in his 30s, met and actually cohabited with a young girl. She was from a dysfunctional family, ran away from home, and moved into the adult man's trailer. Remarkably, he didn't even try to hide their close relationship and introduced her as his girlfriend. He got away with all of this and was not punished in any way. In the spring of 2013, Nate attempted kidnapping for the first time, but he luckily failed. He attacked a 15-year-old schoolgirl right at a bus stop near the school and tried to force her into his car. However, she put up fierce resistance, began to break free and call for help. Passers-by ran to the screams, and the attacker promptly left the scene. Surprisingly, despite the testimony of the victim and witnesses, the case was quickly closed, and it never went to trial. For some reason, no one thought this guy could pose a real threat. A kind stranger. Now let's go back to the day Abigail disappeared, October 9th, 2013. As already mentioned, on the eve of her 15th birthday, The girl received a gift of hiking boots that were a little too tight for her. She decided to wear the shoes a little before hiking in the mountains and wore them to school. Toward the end of class, Hernandez realized her mistake, but didn't give up and walked home. It was getting harder and harder to walk, and each step was painful, but there was still a long way to go home. Suddenly, an old pickup truck, driven by Nathaniel, pulled up beside her. The smiling young man offered her a ride to wherever she wanted to go, but she refused. Nevertheless, the stranger did not give up and continued to roll slowly beside the potential future victim. Nate noticed that Abby was limping a bit and asked her what had happened. Abby sighed and admitted that her new boots were too tight and had given her a blister. Hearing this, the man simply swung open the passenger door and gestured for her to hop in. After hesitating for a moment, Hernandez accepted the offer. She assumed that this kind, smiling man couldn't possibly be dangerous, but she was terribly wrong. On the way, Kibbe started making small talk, trying to put his victim at ease, and he did a pretty good job of it. Abby felt safe, answering his questions and even laughing at his jokes. At one point, the man mentioned that he needed to stop by a hardware store to pick up a few things for a repair job. As they pulled into a dark parking lot, Abigail grew visibly nervous. She told him that her house wasn't far from there and that she could walk the rest of the way. Catching the unsettling look in the driver's eyes, she tried to unbuckle her seatbelt and jump out of the car, but Nate had anticipated her move. In one swift motion, he grabbed her by the clothes with one hand and pulled a gun out of the glove compartment with the other. He pointed it directly at Abby's face and threatened to kill her if she tried to resist. The attacker then tied her hands and feet with zip ties and put a baseball cap on her head in a way that blocked her view, making sure she couldn't see where they were going. But soon, he noticed that Abby had shifted the cap to try to see the road. This infuriated him. He pulled out a stun gun and shocked her until she lost consciousness. Imprisoned by a deranged sadist. Abby woke up in a strange, cramped, and stifling space with no windows. To give you a clearer picture, it was actually a small shipping container owned by Nathaniel, hidden away in the trailer park, tucked behind some trees. Soon after, the kidnapper appeared with duct tape and a motorcycle helmet in his hands. He taped her mouth and eyes shut, put the helmet on her head, and after making sure she was completely immobilized and helpless, he tore off her clothes and assaulted her. From that moment on, he repeatedly forced himself on her, almost every day, turning his twisted fantasies into reality. Nate also used psychological abuse on his captive, threatening to hurt her family if she ever tried to escape or call for help. At the same time, he promised that he'd let her go if she behaved and didn't cause him any trouble. During the first few days of her captivity, Abigail was in a state of shock, practically saying goodbye to her life. But as time passed, she realized that her captor wasn't planning to kill her, at least not yet. She decided to try to connect with him emotionally and see if she could convince him to let her go. She told him that she didn't judge him, that everyone makes mistakes, and that she wouldn't go to the police if he just released her back to her family. However, Nate was unpredictable. The smallest thing or word could set him off, turning him into a monster. Sometimes he would show her a twisted kind of tenderness, but more often he was brutal, using all forms of emotional and physical abuse against her. The container where he kept Abby was well soundproofed, so no one outside could hear her screams. But after about a month, he started bringing her into his trailer, allowing her to take a shower and even watch TV with him. Through the news, they learned about the extensive search efforts for Abby. That's when Kibbe got the idea to have her write a letter to her mother to convince her that Abby was okay and to try to stop the search operation. Abigail wrote several letters under her kidnapper's dictation, and each time, she tried to leave a hint about where to find her. But Nate saw through it and punished her severely. Eventually, she followed his instructions to avoid provoking his anger further. The mystery of the name. About 6 months later, Nate started trusting his captive enough to let her help him with his counterfeit money operation. Sometimes he let her sleep in his trailer and even trusted her to cook meals, but he remained as brutal as ever, continuing to abuse Abby. He forced her to call him Master and kept his real name a secret. Gradually, the obedient captive managed to build some rapport with her captor, and he even agreed to bring her books and magazines. One day, on one of the pages, Abby saw the name Nathaniel Kibbe, but she wasn't sure if that was really her kidnapper's name. So she decided to take a dangerous gamble. One day she simply called him by the name, waiting for any kind of reaction. But all he did was roll his eyes, sigh, and calmly ask how she had learned his name. Abigail admitted that she had seen it in one of the books. He smirked but said nothing. Help was closer than she knew. Since Abby spent most of her time in the soundproof container, she had no idea what was happening outside. She didn't know that at one point the police had been just a few feet away from her, but they were there for a completely unrelated reason. You see, Nate had once again broken the law, and in an attempt to avoid serious trouble, he decided to cooperate with law enforcement and confessed to illegally possessing a firearm. The police showed up with a search warrant, thoroughly inspecting his trailer, but they didn't even think to check the container. For some reason, no one considered taking a look inside. Thanks to his cooperation, Kibbe only received a fine, and his weapon was confiscated. Astonishingly, after all the terrible things he'd done, he still didn't face any real consequences. It seemed luck was on his side, and he probably felt invincible. He had no intention of letting Abby go, but maybe she had become just another part of his routine. A new girlfriend and a miracle escape. In July 2014, Nathaniel met a woman named Lorraine at a bar. After a brief conversation, he took her back to his trailer where they became intimate. Later, Lorraine started complaining about her financial struggles, mentioning that she didn't even have enough money to pay her rent. As she was leaving, Nate handed her two $50 bills, and she left. The next day, a furious Lorraine called Kibbe, telling him that the money he'd given her was fake. She screamed that she'd already informed the police about where she got the counterfeit bills and warned him that law enforcement would be showing up with another search warrant soon. What she didn't realize was that her call would change the life of the missing high school girl forever. On July 20th, the kidnapper unexpectedly gave Abby all her personal belongings, tied her hands, sat her in the passenger seat of his car, and covered her face with a baseball cap. Abby had no idea what was happening and feared that he was finally going to kill her. But then Nate stopped on a deserted country road, freed Abby, and simply told her, "Get out, and don't you dare go to the police." After she stepped out of the car, he floored the gas pedal and sped off. Abby couldn't believe what was happening. She walked along the road in a daze until she saw a sign and realized that home wasn't far away. It took her a couple of hours to make the journey. In later interviews, she recalled constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid that her kidnapper might come back, but he was nowhere to be seen. Coming home. The Hernandez family had a surveillance camera at their front door that captured the moment Abby walked in. Abby heard her mom talking to someone on the phone and called out loudly to her. In shock, her mother dropped the phone and ran to the door. They hugged each other tightly, crying for a long time, unable to believe that the nightmare was finally over and they were together again. Abby noticed how much her mother's appearance had changed. She looked older and worn out from the months of worry. Xenia immediately started asking her daughter where she had been all this time and what had happened, suggesting they go straight to the police. But remembering her captor's threats, Abby decided not to turn him in and lied, saying she didn't know who had taken her or where she had been held. Even at the police station, she refused to reveal his name, afraid that Nate would come after her and her family. Over the next week, Abby wrestled with her thoughts, not sure what to do. Eventually, she decided to tell her mom the truth. Xenia convinced her to go back to the police, arguing that the man who did this needed to be brought to justice. Besides, neither Abby nor her family could truly feel safe while Kibbe was still out there. Arrest, trial, and sentencing. On July 27, 2014, Abigail finally gave the police her kidnapper's name, along with the make and license plate of his car. Nate Kibbe was arrested the very next day, and to everyone's surprise, he didn't put up any resistance, even though he completely denied being guilty. However, when authorities searched his trailer and the container, which they finally checked, they found overwhelming evidence proving that Abby had been held there for months, enduring abuse and suffering. Investigators discovered her hair, blood, sweat, and even broken fingernails. Despite the fact that Nate's guilt was beyond doubt, his lawyer filed a motion in August to have him released on bail. Shockingly, the judge approved this request, causing public outrage and disbelief. But on the same day, an order was issued prohibiting Kibbe from approaching or contacting any members of the Hernandez family. The trial against Nathaniel Kibbe began in December 2014 and continued until May 2016. In an attempt to get a lighter sentence, the defendant agreed to a plea deal and admitted his guilt. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 90 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no sooner than after 45 years. Abigail spoke in court, saying that she forgave her captor and added that because of him, she learned to appreciate her life and every moment spent with her loved ones even more. Her mother also took the stand, stating that while she hated Kibbe with all her heart, she was still grateful that he had spared her daughter's life and allowed her to come home.
The discovery of Paige Bergfeld's car was the beginning of a mysterious story that began on the first Sunday of July 2007. On that day, a red Ford Focus that belonged to the missing Paige was discovered. However, the location where the car was found and its condition raised many questions and raised serious suspicions. The car was located in a remote area that Paige did not normally visit. Moreover, it was completely engulfed in flames of fire, suggesting that something terrible and strange had happened. The county district attorney of the county had been looking into what had happened with special scrutiny, and his preliminary findings indicated that the fire around the car was intentional. The conclusion was supported by the fact that nothing else had burned in the area. The unusual incident involving Paige Bergfeld's car was only the beginning of a much more complicated story. June 28, 2007 was a day that will always be remembered by Paige's family and friends. On this ordinary day, the young woman left her 3 children with friend Carol Linder home and left early in the morning. Nothing portended trouble, and no one could have imagined what would soon happen. Paige was a responsible mother and always called or came to pick up her children on time. Morning came, but Paige never returned to pick up her children. Attentive friends and relatives began trying to contact her, but all to no avail. 8-year-old Jez, the eldest of her children, took the initiative in searching for the missing woman. After sending several messages to her mom's phone and getting no response, she insisted on searching. With Carol, they went to the police station, where Jez reported that her mom had not returned for her. This call to the police was a key point in the beginning of the police investigation and search for Paige Bergfeld. With each passing hour, the concern of Paige's loved ones only grew. The community was shocked by this mysterious disappearance, and many were willing to make every effort to help in the search for Paige. Thus began a massive public search operation to return this young woman to her children and loved ones. That same day, the missing woman's father, Frank Bergfeld, received a disturbing call from an official with the sheriff's department. The message was brief and shocking. His daughter had disappeared. It became clear to Frank that something serious had happened. He tried to contact Paige, but there was no response. Terrified and desperate, Frank called his oldest son, Craig, who was on the other side of the country. Craig didn't hesitate to buy a one-way ticket and arrived in town, ready to help in the search for his sister. Family and loved ones joined forces with police and volunteers to begin a massive search. People from different neighborhoods began searching for Paige, combing the surrounding area, checking every corner where they could find any trace of her whereabouts. The police began scrutinizing Paige's history with her loved ones to see if they had anything to do with her disappearance. Of course, authorities turned their attention to Paige's relationship with her first husband, Howard Bigler. The story of that relationship began during her high school years. After graduating from high school, Paige enrolled in nursing school at the University of Florida, where she met a young man named Howard Bigler. Their feelings for each other proved to be mutual, and they began dating. After successfully earning her nursing degree, Paige returned to Colorado. There she continued to live with her family, but after some time, in 1995, she and Howard Bigler got married. At first glance, the spouses seemed to be a happy couple. They had many common interests and views on life. However, there was one significant rift in their relationship that eventually led to divorce. Paige dreamed of a child and wanted a family, however, Howard did not share her desire. The issue became a cause for arguments and conversations on numerous occasions. None of the attempts to find a compromise was not successful, and in 1997 the couple decided to part ways. Nevertheless, despite the divorce, their connection was strong, and the former spouses remained friends. Paige later married Rob Dixon, but their marriage also ended in divorce. After her divorce from Rob, Paige resumed communication with Howard. The missing woman's first husband claimed that he was one of the last people to see Paige alive.
On the 28th, they met up in Eagle County, Colorado. It was due to personal business. There, they spent Thursday together. The former spouses then returned to their respective cities. Howard confirmed that they continued to communicate by phone after the meeting. Also, upon learning of Paige's disappearance, Howard immediately contacted emergency services. While speaking to the operator, he expressed his deep concern and belief that something terrible had happened to Paige. He noted that she would never leave her children without a good reason. The phone recording was corroborated by cell tower data, showing that on the day Paige disappeared, Howard was in the Denver, Colorado area, which is several hours away from where she disappeared. This gave police officers reason to remove Howard from the list of suspects. Police began to scrupulously examine Paige's relationship with her second husband, Rob Dixon, and quickly uncovered many events that raised questions and warranted further investigation. It turned out that during their marriage, Paige had reported Rob to the police twice for harassment. After her divorce from her first husband, Paige took a job at a strip club in Denver, where she met Rob Dixon. The man was a wealthy man who had inherited a large fortune through his family's business. Having fallen in love with each other, Paige and Rob did not hesitate, and in 1998 entered into marriage. The family settled in a luxurious home in Colorado, where Paige fulfilled her dream of becoming a mother. A few years later, the couple already had 3 children, which became for the young mom the most important thing in her life. The first years of marriage seemed happy. Paige and Rob were immersed in the world of luxury, leading a well-to-do lifestyle. Suddenly, however, things began to fall apart, and the reason for this was due to the financial difficulties Rob was facing. Some of his family's businesses had serious problems, and as a result, the economic situation in the family deteriorated so much that Rob was forced to file for bankruptcy. The financial collapse led to a deep family crisis. By 2004, family tensions had reached such a point that Paige contacted emergency services twice. The first time, she reported that Rob had threatened to kill her and the children, but by the time the police arrived, she and Rob claimed to have worked through their problems on their own. A year later, there was a second incident that was quite different. Paige reported Rob for assault while claiming that he hit her while she was holding her youngest child. This time, Rob was arrested and charged with third-degree assault. He eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of molestation, but the trial was dismissed and Rob avoided jail time. The relationship between husband and wife was getting worse, and they decided to separate, after which Rob moved to Pennsylvania. Investigators interviewed Rob in an attempt to establish his alibi for the day Paige disappeared. Rob claimed that he was in his home and could not have harmed her. Ruling out his involvement in the disappearance, investigators could not. Rob eventually joined the search and was very active in trying to find Paige. Investigating officers spared no effort in an effort to find any clues to unravel this mysterious story and track down the missing mother. One of the first steps was a thorough examination of Paige's car. Based on the assumption that evidence could be found in the car that would help locate the woman, or at least understand what happened to her. Sergeant Weiler of the County Sheriff's Department said that arson is often used to destroy potential evidence. However, an examination of the vehicle provided experts with very valuable information. The driver's seat had been pushed back as far as it would go, indicating that the last person to drive the Ford was a tall man. Paige was short and couldn't have reached the pedals from that distance. In the trunk of the car, they found the missing woman's notebook, from which pages from June 26th through June 29th had been torn out. With each passing hour, the search for Paige grew more desperate. A few days after the burning car was discovered, a random driver stopped on a highway southeast of town for tire problems. A checkbook lying nearby caught his eye, and he immediately reported it to the authorities. While investigating that stretch of road, medical records, insurance cards, and other items belonging to Paige were also found. Sergeant Weiler discovered that several pages in the checkbook had been torn out, and the items were scattered a considerable distance apart. Most significant, however, was a business card found on the road. It became the key to revisiting the investigation. It turned out that Paige led a secret life that her loved ones had no idea about. According to the business card, the woman was an escort under the alias Carrie. This discovery called into question all previous assumptions in the investigation of Paige Bergfeld's disappearance. From that moment on, police officers were faced with new circumstances they had not even realized. After her divorce, Paige realized that from now on, she would have to work and earn as much as she could to provide for her children and meet their needs. She took a determined approach and started her own children's clothing business. At the same time, she taught dance lessons and sold kitchen supplies at a company. Despite her busy schedule, Paige always made time for her children, attended parent-teacher association meetings, and was active in school groups. A new discovery by the police turned the previous picture upside down. It turned out that Paige led a completely secretive life. She had a separate phone at her disposal, which she used for calls related to her professional activities. This phone became the key to unraveling a mystery that was far more complicated than even Paige's close friends and family could have imagined. Investigators' questions only multiplied. Why did such a conscientious mother and successful businesswoman decide to lead a double life? What did this secret profession have to do with her disappearance? All these questions became a priority in the investigation and added a new mystery to the investigation. Using a cell phone found in Paige's car, detectives accessed a list of contacts and calls made and received in the hours before the young woman's disappearance. The last call from that phone was made on June 28th at approximately 9 p.m. As a result of analyzing this information, 7 people were identified as suspects, and one of them was Lester Ralph Jones. Lester Jones's criminal history drew particular attention from investigators. He had a history of violence against a woman and kidnapping on his record. For the latter incident, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, that was not the only thing that alerted the police. His car was white in color, and from the external description was very similar to the car seen by Carol, Paige's friend. Carol shared important information with the detectives. She recounted an incident where Paige approached her car one day and saw another white car nearby that was blocking her driveway. Outraged, she got behind the wheel to turn around and drive away, but the cars collided, except that the unknown driver immediately fled the scene. With this information, investigators speculated that Lester may have been obsessed with Paige and following her. Further investigation revealed that Lester Jones attempted to make an appointment with Paige for intimate services the day before she disappeared. Lester was questioned and denied having any information about Paige's disappearance. He provided fingerprints and DNA samples. However, many suspicious items were found in Lester's home, including a disposable cell phone, men's wigs, Viagra, a sheet with the phone number of an escort service, and women's lingerie in various sizes. The disposable cell phone attracted particular attention from investigators. Analysis of call records on Paige's cell phone showed that on the day of her disappearance, someone tried to contact her several times from an unregistered number. Lester denied under questioning that he had a second cell phone. This meant he lied to the police. Using the packaging found at Lester's home, police were able to determine that the phone had nevertheless been purchased at a supermarket on North Avenue. Video footage from the store identified Lester as the purchaser. When he was shown the video footage, he refused to acknowledge that it depicted him. As a result of all this, Lester Jones became the prime suspect in Paige's disappearance. With no concrete evidence pointing to his guilt, the police continued to follow him and attempted to find Paige's body in order to have enough evidence to press charges. Case was put on hold for several years, and all the while, the young woman's family and loved ones were at a loss for grief. No one knew what had happened to the young mother, and the search seemed hopeless. As time went on,
The hope that Paige would be found alive was dwindling. That all changed in 2012, when a hiker accidentally stumbled upon human remains in a ravine among rocks and bushes in Delta County. The find was discovered very close to the road where Paige's personal belongings had been found 5 years earlier. Experts who arrived on the scene were almost certain that it was the body of a young mother. The experts ran a DNA test, and the results confirmed that it was Paige. She was found, but it was a grisly end to her story. The exact cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the body, but it was found that Paige had been struck many times as several of her bones were broken, particularly the bones in her face. As a result, it was determined that she died from injuries sustained during the beating. This information added to the horrific drama of the story. Paige's body was underground, and due to years of soil erosion, ended up on the surface. This may explain why she was not discovered earlier. Lester Ralph Jones's case came to a halt for several years after Paige's remains were discovered. In November 2014, he was charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, and second-degree murder. However, the trial didn't begin until July 2016 and lasted 22 days. Prosecutors argued that Lester, who already had a history of violence against women, was frustrated at not being able to see Paige after trying to get an appointment with her. The main witness for the prosecution was Lester's ex-wife, Lisa. She recounted how the man kidnapped her and threatened to kill her at gunpoint in the late 1990s. According to Lisa, Lester could not reconcile with her decision to break up with him. On one occasion, he attacked the couple with a gun in his hands, and Lisa's partner was shot in the head. A month later, Lester threatened her again, telling her that she would now end up at the bottom of a lake. However, the woman managed to escape and contacted police, leading to Lester's arrest on kidnapping and assault charges. Lester's defense attorneys tried to argue that the police detained an innocent man and suggested that Paige's other potential clients may have also had a motive for the crime. However, they did not present convincing evidence linking other individuals to the murder. Lester's current spouse also appeared before the jury and argued that although he used an escort service, she did not abandon her husband because of her faith. However, she did not provide him with an alibi and identified him from a surveillance video at a supermarket where Lester was buying a disposable phone. On September 9, 2016, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and the first trial was declared a mistrial. However, the district attorney was convinced of Lester's guilt and wasn't about to give up. Over the next few days, he worked diligently on the investigation and re-examined all the evidence. On November 21, 2016, after reviewing the evidence, the jury finally reached a verdict. Lester was found guilty of all charges in connection with Paige's death. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The defense appealed the sentence, but in June 2022, an appeals court panel upheld the sentence and affirmed Lester's guilt. Paige's final farewell was held on April 28, 2012. Her obituary dedicated beautiful words to her, describing her as a beautiful and radiant woman whose smile could be compared to the sun. Her tragic loss has left its mark on the hearts of her family and friends. Her 3 children were orphaned and had to endure the loss of their mother, who had always been their support and encouragement. Paige's case attracted public attention and dragged on for many years, but still the persistence and perseverance of relatives and law enforcement finally brought justice. Lester Ralph Jones was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now he will no longer be able to harm other people. Paige's story serves as a reminder of the importance of endeavoring to fight for justice, even if it takes a lot of time and effort. Her memory will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories on around the world ahead.